Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, February 8th, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, we're packed. Mark Joseph Stern, staff writer at Slate, on Breyer's successor and the Supreme Court okaying the diminishment black voting power in Alabama. Then Dr. Annelle Sheline, Middle East Research Fellow at the Quincy Institute, on our continued involvement in the war on Yemen. Meanwhile, COVID cases down in nearly every state in the union as it comes closer to a mask-off moment. Wake of Macron meeting Putin seems to be a slight de-escalation of the potential conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Meanwhile, the House to vote on a continued resolution kicking the can on a budget for a month today. And Jill Biden, where's she been? Says that Joe Biden's free community college plan, it's dead. Meanwhile, Peter Thiel quits Facebook, or Meta, or whatever they're calling it today, their board, to help the flailing J.D. Vance and to other Republican Trump candidates.
We need help, Daddy.
Iran talks may be closing in on a new nuke deal. Trump gives up documents that he illegally took from the White House. No word on whether he used a different email. Virginia Governor Youngkin campaign attacks a high schooler who complained about Youngkin's possible rollback of an anti-slavery program centered around the Virginia governor's mansion. And the weight of the FTC sinks NVIDIA's bid to monopolize the chip market in this country. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Tuesday. With me, as she is every day, Emma Vigeland. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Sam. I got nothing.
All right. That was a very decided, intonation at the end of that hello.
Although I will say, anyone, I'm still thinking about this documentary on Netflix. Watch The Tinder Swindler. It is nuts.
The Tinder Swindler?
Swindler, yeah. Okay.
What is that about?
It's about a guy who, well, I don't want to give too much away, but basically he met women on Tinder claiming to be the son of an Israeli billionaire.
Oh, that works, incidentally, I should tell you.
Takes them on private planes, and he's defrauding them. But it gets even crazier, so right. Definitely watch it.
I will check that out. Speaking of swindlers, there was, and just to let people know, there was a tweet thread by Eli Ehrlich. I don't know who Eli is, but apparently they were contacted to do a documentary ostensibly on trans people or gender They are using a front called the Gender Unity Project, and it's Matt Walsh, that creepy guy who works with the other creepy guy, Ben Shapiro, at that creepy website. So check it out. I don't know where they're getting the names of people, who they're trying to trick to get into this documentary. I have no idea what they would have done at that point, but
presumably cherry-picked it for the most the parts that they can make look most embarrassing.
Right. Without a doubt, it is a way in which they're going to. It's a vehicle for their transphobia.
Yeah.
What they're going to do with it, who knows? But that is undoubtedly what what they're up to. So just be careful.
It's like a honeypot situation where they're trying to. Doubtful that they'll represent anything that's said in that documentary if you're recruited by it in its full context.
No, but if you have some free time, go do some counterintelligence and act like you want to help them out and give them some. Apparently they have a fake website, I think it is. Maybe it's the Gender Unity Project. And, maybe a lot of people should visit that at the same time. Anyways, let's, speaking of trying to pull a fast one, as you know, and we are efforting this, we've gotten requests, I think, about some of the organizers for this. There is an attempt to unionize Amazon workers in Staten Island, New York. One of the 5 boroughs of New York. Staten Island people forget sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not from New York, you probably can't even name all 5 boroughs one way or another. I don't know.
I mean, you can name a few, but
it's in a lot of rap. Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, Staten.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you.
Yeah, see that? You forgot the Bronx.
The Bronx.
All right.
Well, if you listen to the Wu-Tang Clan. Right?
Here's the point, though, is they're having meetings, Amazon is, to dissuade people from joining a union. This is one of the problems that we have in this country, that employers have the ability to force workers to attend meetings where they can explain why a union's not good for them. And of course, union organizers don't have the same opportunity to meet with workers. Now, sometimes what happens is more savvy members of the workforce at a certain company will try and inform their fellow workers when they're being lied to by management. And sometimes what they'll do is, even on their days off, they will attend these meetings. And that's a big bummer for management, because they don't want someone there who knows what they're talking about to correct or to inform workers as to what's going on. This is one of the advantages that the management has in these union drives.
And the fact that they employ them and pay them.
Aside from the coercion.
Right, exactly.
And here is a leaked video that came from Status Quo News during a mandatory meeting of Amazon workers in Staten Island, and some of the fellow workers there who took their own time, they're not on company time at this, to come to the meeting, are being threatened by Amazon for being at the meeting, and their jobs being threatened, as if the bosses had the opportunity or the right to dictate what these workers do on their free time. Listen to this.
I just want to be very clear, guys, here. We want to be. Sorry, I feel like we could ask questions. I don't mean to cut you off. To be able to answer questions. I don't mean to cut you off, but I am asking everyone who is not part, who is not scheduled to be, please leave the room right now. If you were not scheduled to be in this particular meeting, I said this 3 times. I'm asking you to please leave the room, and if you don't, you will be insubordinate. And I want to make sure all of you understand that if you refuse to leave the room once I asked you 3 times already, there anyone here? Is there anyone inside the room who did not understand what I shared?
No, we understand, but we also know that you understand that if you make us leave the room, that's a charge against Amazon.
Is this a non-work area?
All right.
Is this a non-work area?
I think I said it 3 times already.
Can you answer my question, Felipe?
3 times. If you were not scheduled to be in the room for this particular meeting, I asked you to leave the room. I asked you. We decided.
Yeah, we're staying. We're staying.
Not leave the room and be in support.
We're staying. Felipe, we're organizing on our non-work time, non-work area. That's the general manager.
Yes, Felipe, we're protected under Section 7A. We're protected under Section 7A. And this is the same reason why we're in this room, because Amazon does a lot of things just like this against workers. You guys are continuously breaking laws.
This is what we're going to do. We are going to get this session started, right? We're going to get this session started. I very clearly told everyone who was not scheduled to be here to leave the room, and you decided to stay. So we're going to get this session started. So right
by the general manager and saying they will be in support if we don't leave.
Thank you.
We'll file more charges. Get ready for them.
Now, I don't know how that resolved, but basically, just so everybody understands what's going on there, this guy, who's apparently a general manager, is telling people who are not, I guess, have been invited necessarily to that meeting or on a work shift that they have to leave. But it is a non-work area. And so they have a right to be there and to organize in a non-work area.
And he says leave or you'll be
labeled
insubordinate.
Insubordinate, which of course is some type of like demerit on your record there. And it is, it's unclear to me that these people were in any way being, stopping the meeting. They were just asking questions to clarify because Felipe, the general manager there, is undoubtedly trying to tell the other workers, like, hey, Amazon's great. We empower all of you, except for if you have questions.
I mean, have you seen those ads too? There is a full on, PR campaign by Amazon with people saying, I make $15 an hour here. I never was able to do that in my previous forklift job, as if they weren't forced into doing so by Bernie publicly declaring and threatening them with that Stop Bezos Act that he had a few years ago. That was a lot of his own doing. And this particular plant has engaged in terrible practices for a while. I mean, if people recall, this is a 2-year in an effort. This is an effort that's 2 years in the making here in the Staten Island plant, because Chris Smalls, he was the one who was retaliated against for attempting to demand better working conditions during the pandemic. So, I mean, solidarity with all of them in the Staten Island plant, because this has been a long time coming there.
And we will continue to follow that as well.
Yeah, and I just it's great to see footage like that leak. That was the status quo. But these sorts of meetings, I think, like letting people see them before they're sort of like put into the situation and see how you can actually react, and modeled by these people in this video, is really important. Really important
to know what rights you have as a worker in these contexts. Just a reminder, we're doing live shows. There is not much more time for you to get a ticket to the Brooklyn show. You got a little bit of time for the Boston show. That's not happening till May, but those tickets are going to sell out soon too. Head over to MajorityLive.com, click on the link, Boston, Brooklyn, and I got news for you. You could go to both if you wanted.
March 26th.
Maybe we'll get like a prize for people who go to both or something. I don't know what that would be.
What's the prize?
I don't know. It occurred to me. I haven't figured it out yet.
They could take a selfie with you or something.
Well, everybody can take a selfie with me if they want, but maybe we'll do like a signed picture of all of us or something.
Oh,
like that.
Okay.
That could be good.
Yeah.
All right, and don't forget.
I was rationing the selfies. I apologize.
Do an NFT maybe.
Don't forget we'll do an NFT. Don't forget also, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityReport.com. All right, we got a couple of guests today. I want to get to them. Let's first bring in Mark Joseph Stern. He's staff writer at Slate and writing about the judiciary, the Supreme Court in particular, often. Mark, welcome back to the program. I'm here with Emma Vigeland.
Thanks so much for having me on. Hi, Emma. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Mark.
So, all right, we got a lot to talk about, and more than we thought, I think, when we booked you yesterday. Obviously, this Alabama case, we'll get to that in a bit. Briefly, and we don't have too much time to go deep into Justice Breyer, but I thought your piece on his characterizing him as not being up to the moment was spot on. I mean, I have some other issues with his work, like on antitrust over the years. He's pretty bad on that. But really, well, you explain. Like, what do you mean by that? He wasn't up to the moment.
Well, look, I also have my issues with Breyer in areas of criminal justice, especially. He sometimes would side with the conservatives. But in that piece, I was more talking about his leadership of the liberal bloc, specifically after Justice Ginsburg died. So there is a very well-established role for the most senior justice in the minority bloc on the court to kind of lead their tribe through the deserts and bring them to a place where they can at least make their voice heard, speak collectively and strongly in their anger with the majority, sort of plant a flag and say, this is dangerously wrong, and fight those decisions as fiercely as they can and try to convince the next generation of lawyers to disavow them and reject the majority's philosophy. And Breyer just wasn't good at that. He was temperamentally so modest and restrained and navel-gazing that he never really found his voice as a leader of the liberals. He almost always sounded conciliatory. He was always searching for an elusive compromise that never materialized. He was the opposite of Justice Sotomayor, who will become the new leader of the liberal bloc, who really, took the gloves off and pulled no punches over the last few years. And so I felt like it was his time to step down for many reasons, one of them being he just couldn't be an effective voice for the three-justice minority. He was not doing the job that he was required of him in this position.
What is that unwillingness, right? Do you attribute it more to like an old school perspective on how justices should be more ivory tower, almost stenographers, or people who are making decisions that are above these things? Like, is getting down and dirty in the way that Sotomayor is likely to do, is that seen by some generation of justices as beneath the position?
Yes, I think that's part of it. Specifically, the generation of justices who were on the court in the 90s and the aughts. During that period, the court went its longest stretch without any change in personnel, nearly a dozen years. And all of those justices really got to know each other, became friends, settled into their groove. This was when Breyer came of age as a justice, and they were all relatively nice to each other. Yes, Scalia was often barbed and could be nasty, whatever. But I think Breyer just had this conception of the court as a tranquil, collegial, warm place where people could put their disagreements aside and keep the temperatures down and just engage intellectually. And that era is long gone with Kavanaugh and Barrett on the bench. Like, this is not the time to be conciliatory if you are on the left. Neil Gorsuch does not have a conciliatory bone in his body. And Breyer was still playing by the old rules and just couldn't figure out how to address this rising tide of churlishness and rage and aggression that was coming from the right. So I do think it was an older school philosophy and a reflection of his many years where the justices were genuinely collegial to each other and the right bloc wasn't just constantly trying to eat the left bloc's lunch.
And this is more than an aesthetic, right? I mean, because we are entering into a period, and we don't know how long it's going to be. It could be 10 years. It's more than likely probably going to be 20 years, maybe 30 years, where the laws of this country are going to dramatically shift to the right. The ability of government to function in the way that we have grown up with it, frankly, all of us, is going to change. The ability of the federal government to protect people's voting rights is going to change. All of these things are going to change dramatically. I don't think that your average person on the street is going to be aware of it on any given point. There's going to be a little bit of a boiling frog quality. But lawyers who are interested in this and who are pursuing judgeships, they're going to know. So the failure of Breyer to do this is not just about aesthetics, and it's not just about, sort of like, right? It really is about coming out with forceful positions that for lawyers coming up 10, 20, 30 years ago who want to be able to reverse this in the same way that we had justices reverse it in really the 30s, in the 40s, to allow for things like the New Deal and for things like child labor laws and for, a whole host of things that define our society, our modern society today. This is about basically planting seeds and giving, creating branches for future lawyers to undo some of the horrible things that are about to happen in this country for the next 10, 20 years.
I think that's right. And I think one illustration of the problem is that if you go up to an average lawyer or law student and say, like, what is Breyer's legal philosophy? What is his jurisprudential outlook? It's hard to give an answer because he liked to compromise. He liked to do trade-offs and bargains to kind of meet in the middle. He famously did this with Sandra Day O'Connor a great deal. Whereas if you asked about Elena Kagan or Sonia Sotomayor, both of them have very sharply established and entrenched views on the law, which they are not apologetic about, which they stick to even when under fire and in the minority, and that I think help current generations of law students and future generations reject the majority's view and the majority's dogmas and say, no, I agree with Elena Kagan. Administrative agencies have a legitimate right to interpret and enforce federal law to protect us from pollution and fraud and all these other terrible things. Or Sonia Sotomayor, who says, the Constitution protects our bodily autonomy. We must read it to protect individual rights, to protect criminal defendants. That is its first line of defense. This structural stuff about states and federal power, that is political. That is for the other branches to sort out. Breyer did not have any kind of philosophy that was so clear. He kind of bended and shifted. He was an admin law professor for years, but that didn't come out in his writings the way you might expect. It ended up sort of pushing him toward acting like a bureaucrat sitting in some obscure federal agency rather than a justice on the Supreme Court. So yeah, I agree with that take for sure.
And I think people also need to understand that it's almost, I think it's always been this way, in my opinion. But it has become far less obscured and far more intense, that we have almost two parallel tracks of political systems in this country as it exists now. I would argue three. Maybe there's one that is sort of nascent in terms of movement building outside of it. But we have the electoral politics, and we have these sort of almost what is really now, in many respects, another political system that is what we call the legal system. And for the past, 25, 30 years with the Federalist Society, there has been a new force within the legal system that is making it even more. It has changed the rules of the way that law is, adjudicated, and in many respects developed, in many respects struck down. And this is why, having someone like a Kagan or a Sotomayor, and I would argue someone to the left of them would be better on a lot of things, but to have people who are providing a trail for the other sort of future judges, right? That's what this is all about.
Yes, and this is something that, William Brennan and Thurgood Marshall did brilliantly throughout the 70s and 80s through the Berger Court and the Rehnquist Court, and planted some flags that later the Supreme Court actually decided, yeah, we need to revisit this, like Bowers v. Hardwick upholding anti-sodomy laws. The dissent in that case paved the way for its reversal years later, and the court adopted the view of the dissent. There's a great line in Lawrence v. Texas, which overturned that decision, where the court says, you know what, the dissenters were right then, they're right today, and we're adopting their view. And I like to imagine that in 20 or 30 years, there will be decisions in which future justices say, Sonia Sotomayor in dissent was right then, she's right today, and we're adopting her view. And you need to have a powerful and clear vision in order for that kind of prescience to emerge from your own opinions. And again, like, Breyer was liberal for the most part. He voted in a lot of important cases the right way, say marriage equality or anti-sodomy laws or some, administrative state laws. But at the end of the day, he didn't have a vision. He didn't have the prescience. And I think that several people on Biden's shortlist do and several don't. And I'm just really hoping that we learn more about them and Biden whittles down the options very wisely with this particular issue and this particular foresight in mind.
All right, let's talk about those options. And I just have to add, had Breyer had what you bemoan he lacks, he would have announced his retirement this time last year. Frankly, in my opinion, because he would have understood what's happening with the court and how important it is. And, knock on wood, we have Ben Lujan out right now. There is no effective, we couldn't confirm somebody today. Hopefully we'll be able to in a matter of weeks. Who are the top picks and give us your assessment of them?
So we are told, and I believe this is correct, that there are 3 on the short list. They are Ketanji Brown Jackson, Leandra Kruger, and Michelle Childs. Ketanji Brown Jackson currently sits on the DC Circuit, which is sort of the second highest court, often a springboard to SCOTUS. She served for about 8 years on the federal district court here in DC before that. Leandra Kruger is a justice on the California Supreme Court, where she is known as a kind of centrist who can bridge the gap between the left and right flanks. And Michelle Childs is currently a federal judge on the district court in South Carolina. She's been nominated to the DC Circuit, and she is, we are told, a favorite of Jim Clyburn, a very powerful kind of kingmaker. He is pushing her for this spot, and Lindsey Graham has decided to join him and say that Michelle Childs is the consensus pick. I would rank them in the order I just listed them. KBJ is my number 1, Leandra Kruger is my number 2, big drop, and Michelle Childs is my number 3.
Well, so, and you say, like, we are told that Jim Clyburn is pushing Michelle Childs. No, he is screaming from the rooftops, it seems like. And he, the other day, was quoted and basically said that this pick has to be bipartisan. It cannot be passed if there's not bipartisan support behind the Supreme Court pick, which is BS. And to me, what I'm fearful of is that this seems to be gaining some steam. Maybe it's because Clyburn's talking to every paper that will listen and is pushing her very publicly. But I'm a little bit fearful that this kind of campaign is going to work, even though Labor has spoken out against Childs a bit.
Right. And Labor has spoken out against her because, of course, she was a management side lawyer, a corporate lawyer who litigated against unions and against labor. And I think it's great that we're seeing these criticisms of her record, because that's how the Federalist Society thinks when the Federalist Society is vetting its own judges and justices. And I think that the left could learn a great deal from how FedSoc vets its own people. You do not just look at a handful of their decisions if they're on the bench, or a handful of their cases if they're litigators. You need to ask if they lived their values. And in FedSoc, that means they devoted themselves to abolishing abortion rights and gay equality and dismantling the administrative state. On the left, that means incentivizing, boosting up labor, encouraging unionization, helping criminal defendants, encouraging LGBTQ equality, abortion access, all of that stuff. Michelle Childs did not live her values. She cashed in as a corporate lawyer. Many people do that. I'm not saying it's the worst thing in the world, but compare her to Ketanji Brown Jackson, who was a federal public defender for many years, who zealously defended a Guantanamo Bay detainee to such a degree that the Daily Caller is currently running a ridiculous hit piece on her, accusing her of basically sympathizing with terrorists. I think the left should look at those two options and say, choose your fighter. Would you like the union-busting corporate lawyer, or would you like the person who is so committed to the Fifth and Sixth Amendments, to defending unpopular criminal defendants, that she went out to Guantanamo Bay and put her career and reputation on the line? This was a very controversial thing in the mid-aughts to defend due process and habeas rights of these individuals who were deemed enemy combatants. I think that's an easy choice. I am a little bit puzzled why Jim Clyburn doesn't agree with me.
Well, I can come up with a lot of reasons why Jim Clyburn doesn't agree with you, but let's put that aside for a moment, because the other aspect of this This is important, and on some level, I'm just speaking to my dad and maybe to Emma's folks too here, because there are generations of lawyers who do not understand this concept, which is that the Federalist Society has been able to make being a member of the Federalist Society a non-starter. If you're not a member of the Federalist Society, you will not get appointed to be a judge by a Republican president ever under any circumstances at this point. And
they have like cocktail parties where they audition.
There's a whole network.
Right, yeah.
But the point being is that they dictate the career paths of lawyers coming out of law school to go into certain types of law, to make certain types of decision from day one. You come out of law school, you're 22 years old, 24 years old, 25 years old, wherever it is, there are specific routes that you take if you want to become a federal judge. You got to clerk here, or you got to serve you got to work for this corporate firm, or you got to do this. On the left, we need to do something like that as well. And they successfully used, and I can't remember who the nominee was, a membership in the American Constitution Society, which is, the sort of left's attempt to create a Federalist Society type of, as a detriment in past years. The Republicans were able to use that against it. There needs to be on the left a system and a funnel where you are rewarded for being a public defender. You are rewarded for fighting against corporations polluting. You're rewarded for a whole host of things, values that we want lawyers to have, and we want society to look that way. So it's not just a question of you can't hold a lawyer's clients against them. We've got to end that when it comes to judgeships.
Yes. And I would sort of elaborate on this a bit. The reason that FedSoc has been so successful isn't just that it brings people into this clubby network and boosts their careers. It's that many of those individuals end up getting boosted to the federal judiciary. And so the ultimate prize as you're going up the ladder is often a federal judgeship after years of lucrative corporate work usually. And I would say, obviously the American Constitution Society is not a real alternative to FedSoc. I completely agree with you that the left needs to build out an infrastructure that creates a real pipeline from law school straight to the federal courts that incentivizes progressive advocacy. I think that Joe Biden is doing the most a president possibly can to help create that infrastructure now, because he is very actively and conscientiously rewarding people like Ketanji Brown Jackson who lived their values with federal judgeships, rewarding Black women who refuse to cash out and go into corporate work, rewarding an unprecedented number of LGBTQ people, of women, of people of color who did not just go to Jones Day and help bust unions or whatever, but actually went and did the hard work of protecting civil liberties and protecting important regulations. They are now getting judgeships as well. And so a generation of law students right now are looking at this pipeline that Biden has kind of created or facilitated and saying, that could be me. I could also start on this path. They can't do it as easily as FedSoc because they can't just sign a form and pay dues and get on the fast track to the courts. But we are starting to see this infrastructure develop. And it's one reason why I have been very critical of Biden not nominating any reproductive rights advocates to the federal judiciary thus far, because young, very excited and ambitious law students are going to look and see that Biden hasn't nominated abortion rights lawyers and say, well, defending abortion rights as your primary career path must be a poison pill. So I'm going to avoid doing it. And that is the exact opposite message that the White House should be sending, because George W. Bush nominated a bunch of people who spent their entire careers litigating against abortion, who said abortion is an evil on par with slavery and I am devoting myself to destroying it. They got federal judgeships. A generation of lawyers decided that attacking abortion was the way to go, and they are now going to overturn Roe v. Wade. So there needs to be a big picture attitude here where we look at every single progressive cause and make sure that there's real representation. But Biden is doing almost as good a job as you could expect. And now I think the work falls on the progressive legal community to back him up, building out that pipeline further.
This is it's such an important point. I'm so glad you've been talking about this, because it really there just broadly is not an appreciation of that, and it allows people to see what's been going on the right, and how also we should say a lot of these when McConnell pushed through 180, I think it was, lifetime federal appointments, 234 over the course of 4 years. So many of them also were hiding the ball, because they also knew that was part of the strategy as well. But everybody could be sure where, how they were going to adjudicate. There's not going to be any suitors. We're never going to see a David Souter again, where a Republican president is going to appoint somebody who later you're like, well, actually, he seems a little bit more moderate than we thought at the time. All right. So with that said, let's talk about what happened with Alabama. I mean, it is stunning, and it's stunning the way they did it. It is so blatant. All right, just tell us what the ruling, to the extent that it was a ruling. I mean, it was really just like a switch flicked, essentially. But tell us what it was.
So, are we allowed to curse on this show? That might be helpful. No,
I will give you special dispensation.
This decision was fucked up beyond my capacity to explain in the time we have left, but I will try, because there is one provision of the Voting Rights Act that remained until last night that was genuinely enforced, that the Supreme Court hadn't yet hobbled, and that was its ban on racial gerrymandering. This is a core component of the VRA, so important that when the Supreme Court last weakened it in the early 80s, Congress came back and redid the VRA to ensure that this would stand as a bar against racial gerrymandering. When I say racial gerrymandering, what I mean is a state packing as many Black voters as possible into a single district, and then distributing the remaining few throughout a bunch of majority white districts, so Black people can only elect at most one representative. That is exactly what Alabama did here. Alabama, the percentage of Black people who live in Alabama is about 27 to 30% of Alabama residents are Black. This new map that Republicans drew in Alabama, 7 districts, Black people make up a majority of only one of them. So Black people control 14% of congressional districts in a state where they make up nearly a third of the total population. That is just blatantly and brazenly illegal under the VRA. The whole point of this provision of the VRA is that you can't carve up Black communities so that you have one crazy district that packs almost all of them in, and then a bunch of other districts where they're distributed and can't really elect their preferred representatives. So how obviously illegal is this? A 3-judge court with 2 Donald Trump appointees. 2 of 3 judges on this court were appointed by Donald Trump with Mitch McConnell's assent. They held that this was a blatantly illegal racist gerrymander. They said, come on, guys, you did not even try. They held a trial. They had thousands of pages of motions and declarations. They had all of these hearings. They issued a 225-page opinion, meticulously laying out all of the reasons why this was obviously a racial gerrymander. And they said, Alabama, you've got to redo this. You've got to unpack all of these Black voters and give them a real chance of electing another preferred representative. The Supreme Court steps in at the very last minute and without any reasoning, without any explanation, issues an order blocking that decision by the 3-judge court indefinitely, ensuring that the illegal map will be used in 2022 and probably for the rest of the decade. No reasoning, and it was so outrageously wrong that John Roberts, Chief Justice John Roberts, the architect of the assault on the Voting Rights Act, the guy who was in the Justice Department in the 1980s trying to prevent Congress from amending it to block racial gerrymandering, he dissented from this decision. John Roberts said that this decision was wrong because the lower court obviously got it right. If that is not proof that this is a completely lawless order, I just don't know what proof would look like.
Just so that people know, I mean, this is a rough sketch I just did.
this is what the district looks like, right? You have up here and here where the highest densities of black people are, and they literally had to draw it like this to essentially make sure that there was no black voting power distributed in anywhere except for this one district. And just to explain to people, when you say there's no reasoning, there was no explanation, you're not being, this is not hyperbole. There was literally no reasoning, no explanation. Explain how that can be.
The shadow dockets, which is the way that the Supreme Court often makes law now, is the term that we use.
This is recent. You say that this is recent, right? I mean,
yeah. The shadow docket, as we know it, did not exist until Brett Kavanaugh joined the court, and it did not really take off until Amy Coney Barrett joined the court. Before Kavanaugh and Barrett, the court just wasn't doing this stuff. It was not issuing these emergency orders in these big cases. It was not issuing them at midnight or in the evening or randomly, dramatically overhauling the law, refusing to explain its reasoning. This is solely the result of a very aggressive and empowered 5-justice ultra-conservative majority saying, we don't need to hold oral arguments. We don't need full briefing. We don't need to respect precedent. We're just going to do whatever we want and not even pretend to act like a court. We're just going to act like a legislature passing bills that say this is the result.
It's not even like that. It's not even like that. Honestly, it's not. I mean, in a legislator passing a bill, there would be debate. There would be some process. This is just like, this is it right here. It's just up or down. I mean, Siskel Ebert spent more time explaining why they did what. This is just literally thumbs up, thumbs down, boom, we're done.
It's more like the gladiator situation in terms of the stake that we're talking about.
Yes. And so that's what the court did last night, just gave a thumbs down. And in doing so, pretty much blew up the Voting Rights Act, or what remained of it. Because, as I said, if this is not a racial gerrymander prohibited by the Voting Rights Act, there is no such thing as a racial gerrymander. I mean, this is the most egregious example you could come up with. It's textbook. And so the 5 ultra-conservatives just said thumbs down, one paragraph, no explanation, no reasoning. Brett Kavanaugh wrote this snitty little petulant concurrence that was basically responding to Elena Kagan's excellent dissent, which I encourage everyone to read. He was trying to explain his reasoning. It's very muddled. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. He implied that he and his colleagues have just totally overhauled and rewritten the rules by which the court operates and is now issuing these decisions basically on the merits. It used to be that the court could not legally intervene unless one party had a slam dunk case. And now he said, well, we're making up new rules. Now, if we think it's kind of close, we're just going to step in and rule for the state and allow it to keep its racist voting laws. That's new. He didn't really explain why or how that rule came to be, but that's apparently our new governing rule. But he wasn't even writing for the majority. He was just explaining his own vote because he got pissed that Elena Kagan absolutely pantsed him in her dissent.
I mean,
I don't love that visual, but
well, I mean, at this point, it's like, and this is not the first of these type of things, although I think it could be one of the most egregious in terms of the vote. I mean, where, the importance of the Voting Rights Act, the now 9-year, I guess, assault on it is nearly complete. We should remind people, too, that supposedly they don't even seem to articulate this anymore, original intent and, activist court. We don't even hear the right use those terms anymore, because when it comes to the Voting Rights Act, people should understand this. It was reauthorized in 2007, I believe it was, with 98-2 in the Senate. I mean, there could be no greater expression of what the legislator wanted to do, what lawmakers wanted to do, than that reauthorization. And that reauthorization was completely scoffed at by the Roberts Court in 2013 when they gutted Section 5, and subsequent to that, they've just been putting it through a meat grinder.
And essentially, the way that they described their reasoning was that, well, we looked into the hearts of the legislatures and we realized that they were guilted into reauthorizing.
Yeah, they were afraid. They were
right. And Justice Scalia famously, when confronted with this argument about how it was overwhelmingly reauthorized, he said, well, it's a perpetuation of racial entitlement. Those are the terms that he used. And so he said, of course, Congress isn't going to step in and take away this racial entitlement that's created this windfall for Black people. You know, it's us, the court, that has the constitutional duty to be brave where Congress couldn't and tell Black voters, you just don't deserve these protections anymore.
And so what is being done from your perspective to sort of like heighten the awareness of what's going on with the courts? I mean, I am convinced that if I had to pick one reason why Donald Trump became president, I think it was Mitch McConnell keeping that seat open. I think that more than anything else, there were millions of theocrats out there who are like, this is our opportunity to get rid of abortion. Now, I think there was a whole host of other things like the Voting Rights Act, et cetera, that a lot of other Republicans were savvy enough to understand, and corporatists who were savvy enough to understand the implications of this. But I think keeping that seat open, because the right has an appreciation for these things. Do you see anything by the administration, by the body politic, by the Democratic Party, by anybody to sort of make voters understand the relationship between their vote and the diminishment of Black voting in Alabama? And we could keep going on and on and on, but the loss of sovereignty of a women's body, but then also, you know, the ability of government to say to corporations, you can't pour your mercury into the water.
So I think the Biden administration has totally dropped the ball. Biden had his study commission on the court. It issued its report, which was sort of like mushy, didn't explain any kind of conclusions, just said, well, the court is a land of contrasts, and moved on. And Biden has just ignored it since. I think that some Democrats in Congress are leading the way here, people like Mondaire Jones, who are going out there and jumping up and down and saying these decisions are awful and eroding our democracy. Some of them have sponsored the Judiciary Act of 2022, which would add 4 seats to the Supreme Court, which is the only real solution here. And beyond that kind of core of activist progressive lawmakers, you are seeing some consensus among Democrats that the court needs to be reined in. And I think Exhibit A here is that one of the voting rights bills that passed the House, sadly died in the Senate, actually included a court reform provision that would have, at least ostensibly, prohibited the Supreme Court from doing what it did last night. That would have barred the Supreme Court from intervening to block a Voting Rights Act action in a state on the basis that, as Kavanaugh said, it was like too close to an election. The House Democrats almost unanimously said, we're going to change the court's rules, which is within Congress's power. That's actually something that Congress can do, even if it doesn't do it often. So I think Democrats are waking up to this, but it's too late, and they aren't necessarily cluing in their constituents that at the end of the day, the Supreme Court is the most powerful policymaking institution in this country, will be for decades, and everyone needs to pay way more attention to it than they currently do.
Mark Joseph Stern, we're out of time. I want to have you back so we can talk about the crap show that is the affirmative action ruling and a whole host of other rulings that are taking place. You know, and frankly, the ruling they had on the mandate in OSHA, I think that's going to have a lot of implications in terms of like the non-delegation doctrine and Chevron, and these are things that we need to talk about. I mean, to the extent that we can educate a small amount of people as to the importance of this stuff, I really appreciate you coming on and doing it.
Anytime, Sam. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Let's go. We have Dr. Annelle Sheline here, Middle East Research Fellow at the Quincy Institute. Do we have her? Okay. Annelle, thank you so much for joining us. I'm here with Emma Vigeland, and apologize for keeping you waiting, but we rather exercised about the Supreme Court.
I was hearing. Thanks for having me on.
So, want to get an update from you about our involvement in Yemen. Joe Biden, on the campaign trail, and I think actually maybe as president in those early days, said we are done with this. The Biden administration publicly announced that we would no longer support offensive actions by Saudi Arabia in its bombing and within Yemen. And people were a little skeptical as to what that meant. And it really appears that skepticism was warranted. Will you catch us up? And for those people who don't understand what's going on in terms of the conflict within Yemen and the outside forces that are implicated, will you just catch everybody up on that?
Yes. So exactly as you said, a year ago, Biden had said that the U.S., he said this war must end, and that the U.S. was going to end the sale of offensive weapons. And unfortunately, a year later, what we've seen now is actually the potential for U.S. Escalation and the further involvement of the U.S. in this conflict due to the fact people may have heard about the attacks that the Houthis have been sending at the UAE. And in response, the U.S. has now sent the USS Cole, a destroyer warship, as well as multiple fighter aircraft. And the scary possibility is that what if the Houthis hit an American soldier stationed in the UAE or stationed in Saudi Arabia? Then what's Biden going to do? Is he going to launch a war on the Houthis? A year ago, he seemed determined to pull out and to end U.S. support for the Saudi-led war. And yet here we are escalating our presence.
Well, but it was so clear the language he used. And I remember honestly saying at the time, offensive operations, we are going to end our financial support. I mean, that is very parsed language, and that's on purpose, right? They want to still be able to send the arms and the weaponry that Saudi Arabia needs for its defensive operations, which just means that the blockade continues, and to help support the blockade, okay, we're going to continue our bombing campaign. So there's really no fundamental difference there. And was that reality reflected on the ground in terms of the arms that we gave?
Totally. So this offensive defensive distinction is doing so much work here. And unfortunately, we see members of Congress also buying into this. And the point is, we've sold Saudi Arabia hundreds of billions of dollars of offensive weapons. So they already have all of those. And what we've sold subsequently, this is where it gets to this question of well, is it an offensive or a defensive weapon? If it's being used to enforce the blockade, that is inherently an offensive action. This whole Saudi-led war is an offensive action being conducted upon Yemen. And yet, unfortunately, we do see members of Congress that were willing to do things like introduce a successful war powers resolution against President Trump in 2019, which passed. This was the first time we saw Congress asserting its authority granted in 1973 with the War Powers Act to limit the imperial presidency. Trump vetoed it. And what our organization and others are trying to do now is to reintroduce a war powers resolution. But it's a question of, are Democrats going to go against Biden the way they were willing to go against Trump? That, it was clear Trump was just in bed with the Saudis, and the Khashoggi thing had just happened, and it was all very distasteful for, I think, a lot of Americans. But now it's, I think people are getting a little bit confused. And the fact is, Saudi Arabia and the UAE are killing Yemen, and the U.S. is completely complicit.
Okay. For the sake of that, for clarification, will you just give us a remedial rundown on the conflict in Yemen and the supposed, I guess the conventional wisdom as to who is backing the Houthis and who are the different players here? And in some respect, this is a surrogate conflict again, almost like everything in the Middle East, it seems like, between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But just walk us through the different sort of players here so that people can get some clarity in that respect.
Definitely. So the war in Yemen began as a civil war. And it became internationalized in 2015 when the Saudis led a coalition of other Arab countries to kick out the Houthis, who had seized control of the capital. The Houthis are a group of Shia rebels who do receive support from Iran. And this is part of where I think people get confused, is because they hear, well, Iran is supporting the Houthis and we don't like Iran. But the point is, you think about the scale of what Iran smuggles in or assistance that they provide to the Houthis, as opposed to the hundreds of billions of dollars that the U.S. sells to Saudi Arabia and, again, has for decades, as well as the UAE, as well as Israel, the rumors of Israeli involvement in this as well. And thinking about the devastation of Yemen, where the population, 400,000, almost 400,000 people have died. Many of them actually as a result of things like the blockade. So Saudi Arabia is allowing only a tiny fraction of fuel to get into the country, specifically the territory controlled by the Houthis. People are starving. The Saudi coalition continues to target things like hospitals, and the internet was knocked out for several days just a few weeks ago. And so, again, there's I think there's this question of, well, we don't like that Iran is supporting the Houthis, and the Houthis have done horrific things. But the point is, the Houthis there are many parallels, in fact, to Afghanistan here, that you have a population so devastated by war that they really don't care anymore. They just want the violence to end. And they're willing to let the Taliban or the Houthis or, these repressive, misogynistic, hyper-religious jerks take over, because they're the ones that are going to be able to reimpose some kind of survival, the ability of Yemenis to survive, or Afghans to survive, and that they are the ones resisting this foreign aggression. And so you have people, whether Afghans or Yemenis, who don't like the fact that this is the group that would take over, but that's the only one fighting on their interests against the foreign invaders.
And so, I'm sorry, just to clarify. So, what is the interest of Saudi Arabia and UAE? I mean, why is it so incumbent upon them to kill so many Yemeni and to devastate the Houthi?
So originally, Saudi Arabia was involved because they feared Iranian involvement and support for the Houthis. What's ironic is back in 2015, when the Saudis first invaded, the Iranian relationship to the Houthis was really quite minimal, and it has grown significantly since then. And so the thing the Saudis feared is now a much bigger problem. The other thing is the Houthis have gained much more territory and much more capacity to launch drones and missiles across the border at Saudi Arabia. And so what had started as kind of a war of choice, and unfortunately the UN backed up the Saudi decision, and this also gets to sort of the international community's complicity in this, where you have the US and the UK and France all mostly interested in continuing to sell weapons to the Saudis rather than trying to end what's happening in Yemen. But the point being that the Saudis at this point essentially would like to find a way out. We know that MBS is instituting massive changes to Saudi society. He needs a lot of money to pull that off, and yet he's just throwing money to devastate Yemen, when actually what Saudi Arabia eventually will need to do is to try to restabilize Yemen, so they don't have this failed state right on their border, where we know there's a history of Al-Qaeda activities, and it's not in Saudi's interest to have Yemen be a total basket case, but at this point, that is what they are creating.
But then whose interest is, I mean, there also is the UAE that is involved here as well. I mean, can you talk a little bit about their involvement and why maybe they might be a little bit more interested in this conflict continuing? Because the Trump administration at the last second designating the Houthis as a terrorist organization, and because of their association with Iran, I think that puts that in some better context. But two, when you do that, and the Biden administration considering doing this is very dangerous, right? Because when you do that, you block all aid that could go to starving Yemenis. And right now, it's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world for a reason. Starvation, disease is a massive problem there. So I guess that's a two-pronged question. What is the UAE's involvement here? And two, what are the risks involved if the Biden administration is actually going to is considering doing what was at the time considered an extreme action by the Trump administration on his way out the door?
Totally. So first to the UAE, we had seen the UAE being involved, a partner of Saudi Arabia in the coalition that got involved in 2015. Interestingly, as I was saying, 2019 was when we saw sort of the high watermark of congressional opposition to this. And it was at the end of 2019 that the UAE said, you know what, we're going to withdraw, and withdrew most of their military. They continued to hold key locations, places like the island of Socotra, key ports, for example, because Yemen, the edge of Yemen is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is the southern access to the Red Sea, Suez Canal, Mediterranean, and Europe. So it's a crucial waterway. And the UAE would like in the future to have, whether it's a future independent South Yemen or just an autonomous Southern Yemen, essentially serve as a client state for the UAE to sort of expand their control, again, of this crucial waterway. But they had decided they weren't interested in fighting the Houthis over it because they could just kind of control the south, and that was fine. And it was only after we saw these meetings between White House officials, the Saudis and Emiratis, that then we saw the UAE escalating their involvement, which then precipitated the UAE-backed militia groups retaking territory, which then prompted the Houthis to fire at the UAE to say, hey, it was fine when you guys were just hanging out in the south. We're not interested in that territory. Now we're going to attack you and really potentially seriously damage the UAE's economy, which is, dependent on oil, but also very dependent on tourism and being seen as this bastion of stability for commerce and investment in the region. And so now the question is, what is the UAE going to do here? And what we've seen from the US is sending this escalating support to convince the UAE to stay involved. To your point about the foreign terrorist organization, the FTO designation of the Houthis, what's so ironic is the Trump administration only did that at the very 11th hour of his presidency because they knew it would be a debacle given the humanitarian implications, and they didn't actually want to have to deal with that. And so they did it at the very end, so Biden would have to be the one that lifted it and deal with the potential political ramifications of that, of which there were almost none because condemnation of that designation was unanimous, that it would not constrain the Houthis' ability to act and organize as a group, but it would devastate the people of Yemen because the Houthis control the territory where 80% of Yemen's population lives. So 30 million people in Yemen, 24 million people live in Houthi-controlled areas. So it would not only prevent any sort of aid from reaching those 24 million people, it would prevent any sort of legitimate financial transaction from taking place either. I mean, again, we're seeing this sort of right now in Afghanistan with the sanctions put on the Taliban, that you cannot send money to family in Afghanistan. Businesses cannot operate, even if there are humanitarian exceptions. No business really wants to worry about getting on the wrong side of the Department of Treasury and getting themselves in legal trouble just to sell goods to starving Afghans or starving Yemenis. So the fact that the Biden administration is about to do something that even the Trump administration knew they didn't really want to deal with, being responsible for further immiserating the people of Yemen, Biden is considering doing this right himself and taking that on, again, just because we continue to see, unfortunately, the Biden administration just going back to this same old script of just unconditional support for the Saudis and the Emiratis, and this sort of reactive antipathy towards Iran. The JCPOA being a whole other question here of why didn't Biden just get right back into it? What's going on? Even if they managed to get back into it, to what extent would it even be successful?
All right. So there's two things that one, to what extent has been the failure of the American people to engage, care, speak out against what's happening in Afghanistan open the door for this designation for the Houthi? I mean, somebody somewhere in the White House is saying, we're not paying a price for starving Afghanistan, and we were there for 20 years and we obliterated that population. We couldn't be more involved and responsible for the Afghan people, and yet there's no public outcry about what's happening there. Occasionally a story in the New York Times, and that's it. I mean, how much does that open the door for this designation? And then sort of a subsidiary question, how much does the fact that oil went up 7 cents a gallon this past week, or the gas went up 7 cents a gallon. I don't know what it is. A barrel of oil is now like getting close to what, one of its peaks. How much does that play into this when the Biden administration is thinking, for 2022, we really need gas prices to fall, and we need OPEC and Saudi Arabia to pump more gas, more oil. So how much of those two factors weigh at this? One is like there's no constraint on one hand, and on the other hand, there's an incentive to appease Saudi Arabia because of political considerations here.
Totally. I think that's a super important point. When you think about the number, just the pages of ink spilled about, well, we have to protect Afghan women and we have to stay there. And 20 years of this, of like, it is our responsibility to save the women of Afghanistan. And, dead women can't go to school. Like the fact that now the American people seem to really be fine with the starvation of Afghanistan imposed by the United States, I think is clearly, I think that's a great point about the Biden administration suspects they would not pay a political cost for the further devastation of Yemen. In terms of the question of gas prices, obviously that is likely a consideration. But, ironically, there are other decisions the Biden administration could make if they want to keep gas prices low. One of them would be bringing Iran back into the global oil market. That would bring production capacity way back up and would also limit the ability of the Saudis to drag us around and force us to comply with policies of theirs that, again, Americans for a long time have wondered, why do we continue to support this regime that behaves in ways that are so inimical to American values when we're not even dependent on Saudi oil anymore? Sure, it's all a global market and the price, the Saudis can have a big influence on the price. But again, the point being, if it were really about oil prices, there are a lot of other policies that the US government could undertake if that were really the driving factor here. I think what an important thing to keep in mind is that the Biden administration, unfortunately, after initially signaling that we were going to do this pivot to China and the Middle East is not as important of a priority, we're ending the endless wars and we're getting out. Instead of actually doing that, what we've seen is that this competition with China, the Biden administration thinks is going to happen in the Middle East, which is why they think it's so important to maintain these super strong relationships with our security partners. But the point is, we haven't seen China exhibiting any interest in taking on the, playing the really botched role the US has played in the region. Why would China want to follow our example in the Middle East? They're really just interested in economic partnerships, and they're very good at that. And I think the US, unfortunately, knows that the only area where we compete is on weapons sales. We can't necessarily compete with China on economic partnerships, even though I think we should be trying a lot harder and not trying to tie our entire sort of alliance structure to our ability to sell other people weapons, because again, it just creates blowback and continues to generate these situations where the US is then forced to become more involved. So again, if something happens and we're sort of dragged backwards into another war in the Middle East, Americans are still fed up with this and really ready. We're really initially, I think, welcomed the Biden administration's push to say no more unnecessary wars in the Middle East.
What's stunning about what you've just laid out in terms of the Biden administration thinking that the Middle East is the key to our, fight for supremacy or equilibrium with China, it's exactly, I'm quite convinced, was a major reason why we invaded Iraq. Because it was certainly the Cheneys who felt in the year 2000. And we can go back and I interviewed Gary Hart about this when they were doing the 21st century threat. It was Lynn Cheney or Liz Cheney, one of the Cheneys, who was sitting in that, as everyone was saying, non-state actors. She was insisting it was China. And so this was, China was on their mind in the late 90s. It was in their mind in the, the New World Order following the 93 fall of the Soviet Union. And the idea that this has currency in the Biden White House is just absurd.
Well, there are a lot of Bush carryovers. I mean, people like Brett McGurk, who really is running Middle East policy right now and is driving this possible redesignation of the Houthis as a terrorist organization. This is who these people are. I mean, this is the blob, the foreign policy establishment that never faced any kind of they were never held accountable for the debacle of the Iraq War. You know, people failed up, and we continue to see that. And I think you're absolutely right that if 9/11 hadn't happened, we likely would have seen this kind of pivot to Asia a lot earlier, and instead we got bogged down in the Middle East for 2 decades to the detriment of our own security. You know, arguably the amount of resources, the amount of terrorist groups there are now, it's insane, sort of the way U.S. policy has gone for the past 20 years. And now we're sort of gearing up against China, this notion that we have to raise our defense budgets and we might be going to war with Russia in the coming days. We have to be prepared to fight 2 great powers, when for the past 20 years, our entire military has been focused on counterinsurgencies, which did not make the U.S. safer, and instead have only drained resources that really needed to be going to the American people, to actual threats like climate change, for example.
Well, you mentioned Russia. What is, and I know this is not necessarily your portfolio, but maybe in the commissary there, what is your sense about where we're at this point? Are there indications that things are starting to at least maybe de-escalate, or what?
I mean, I think, we've heard President Biden try to deflate some of these notions that we're actually going to go to war with Russia over this. And, the Americans have been very clear about this. But again, unfortunately, what you see, at least here in Washington, is all just the rhetoric about the absolute necessity of having Ukraine join NATO, and just all of these questions that unfortunately you get such an echo chamber of people emphasizing these talking points that are so disconnected from the fact that we're supposed to be a democracy and our foreign policy should reflect what's actually good for the American people. And the average American, regardless of concerns about Russia and meddling, et cetera, I think, unfortunately, a lot of this also ties into domestic politics and these concerns about what Putin is doing, et cetera, all of which are legitimate concerns. But again, that doesn't, fighting with Russia over Ukraine is not going to address those concerns. So I agree with you that I think it's encouraging that thus far, maybe things are moving towards de-escalation, but the really alarming thing is whether it's a crisis in Ukraine or a American gets killed by a militia in Iraq, or something happens in the South China Sea, that this town shifts so fast into warmongering, and then war making, and this is part of what groups like mine are trying to push back against is to say no, that should not be our hair trigger response, and we need to really think about what is in our own national interest here.
Let me just ask you one thing about the obviously by domestic politics. It was Russia's involvement, to the extent that it actually had any implications, who knows? But Russian involvement in the 2016 and to some extent 2020 election. How is it that the Republicans, who are ostensibly not so concerned about that Russian interference, were the ones who are pushing for preemptive sanctions as opposed to conditional sanctions, which it seems, broadly speaking, the Democrats want conditioned sanctions. Sanctions kick in if you invade Ukraine. The Republicans are saying, well, we'll have those, but we also want some other ones to do. Like, what is that? What is behind their just wanting to sanction now, as opposed to if you do the thing we don't want you to do?
Well, Sam, I think your demand is a certain level of logical consistency from politicians that, we're I don't know if we're ever going to get there. But I think in general, as I was saying, this town runs on funding war. And you think about just like the amount of contributions members of Congress and senators get from the big 5 weapons contractors and other defense contractors. The U.S. weapons industry is such a powerful lobby, and so there's been great research done on not only that question, but other questions in terms of like support for escalating the DoD's budget, which we're now approaching $1 trillion a year that we are sending to this one department of the U.S. government. And just there's such a direct correlation between who gets donations from these kinds of corporations and then what sort of policies are they implementing. So in general, we know that there's a stronger anti-war movement on the left, just historically. That's been part of our history. And so you have more Democrats in Congress who have constituencies who are pushing back on them and saying, no, we're not interested in another war, and don't even think about it. Whereas on the right, there's not as much of that kind of a tradition, unfortunately. And we are seeing certain organizations, like one of our funders, the Koch brothers, the Charles Koch Foundation, is interested in creating more space for that. We see that also coming from libertarians on the far right or on the right who don't necessarily like the amount of money that goes into the Pentagon and don't like the amount of then sort of militarization of police and what we observe meted out upon Americans, as we especially observed in 2020. But again, it's much smaller on the right. And so this is, I think, to answer your question, why you can see Republicans holding these sort of logically contradictory positions where they're advocating for war with Russia or broad-based sanctions against Russia, and at the same time seem really okay with the notion of maybe Russian meddling. Who cares?
Well, it is. Hopefully, some cooler heads will prevail, and maybe we can get that generation of neocons that have been embedded themselves in our national security apparatus. I don't know. Maybe it's just going to take attrition, essentially. Dr. Annelle Sheline, Middle East Research Fellow at the Quincy Institute, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for your ongoing efforts to draw attention to Yemen. It's really important.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks. Extra show today. Extra freebie show. So if you have but they're both things that we wanted to get to, and we were just too booked up this week. So we doubled up.
We doubled up.
I'm not going to apologize for that.
Yeah, I mean, no one's asking you to.
All right.
Maybe next day we'll triple up, huh?
Well, we'll see. Folks, you can support this program. You can support the free half by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. And when you do, you not only support the free half and indulge us when we got to double up because we just got too many great guests that are booked over the course of a week, to bring you a better understanding of how the court systems work in this country, or our involvement in Yemen and what's behind some of these incredibly stupid and counterproductive and inhumane actions that we take as a government, as a society. I can't remember what I was talking about at that point. I lost my train of thought. But you can support all that, not the inhumane stuff, but just the talking about it. And
you can also support you if you're going to be on any shows in the near future.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So you can go to jointhemajorityreport.com, and also you can watch me tonight on a show called Doomed. It is the 200th episode.
Wow.
Of Matt Binder's Doomed. And I think it's going to be the first time that Matt Binder will be interviewing me. In fact, it'll probably be the longest conversation we've ever had, contiguous. It's, I mean, I don't know if that's 100% true, but it's possible. I mean, just like sheer one-on-one, just sitting there, focused on each other.
First time he's had a CIA operative on his program as well.
I doubt that, but it's certainly going to be the most prominent CIA operative that he's had on.
Yeah, makes sense.
So you can check that out. Matt Binder's Doomed tonight, 9 p.m. Maybe there's a chance you will hear my children yelling in the background. Hopefully I can get the youngest one to sleep by then. There's a lot of craziness going on at the house right now. The apartment, whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Don't forget, jointhemajority.report.com. Also, justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority to get 10% off. And don't forget those live shows, Majority Live. Matt, what's happening in the MLU?
I don't know if I like that. Yeah, tomorrow night on Left Reckoning, we're going to have Mike Prisner of the Empire Files on, talking about Ukraine, Afghanistan, the Red Hill Fuel Facility in Hawaii, and Abby Martin's legal fight against anti-BDS legislation in Georgia. A certain free speech issue you don't hear much about, but yeah, she fought this bill that said you have to take a loyalty oath to speak in Georgia, and they won, and then Georgia got together and changed the bill to like take away that victory and changed it to only if you're getting paid $100,000 or more do you have to take the loyalty oath.
So then they gotta refile if they want to fight that?
Yeah, so now I guess it's like, and it was done with like Israeli help apparently in the state house, and it's and so now she can't, because they're not going to pay her $100,000 to speak there, so she won't have standing to challenge.
Oh,
wow.
Interesting.
She's relentless, though. That's a great guess.
Just to be clear, I don't know how many states in the country, there are maybe 30 states or something like that, where, and this came out, it got wide publicity in Texas, where I think it was a speech therapist was contracted by a school system in Texas to provide speech therapy for some kids, some students, and she refused to sign this pledge that said if you're a state contractor that you will not boycott Israeli products. And she was like, what? And then, I think she successfully won that case. Then,
after The Intercept highlighted her story, we should say, too, if you want to check out that full thing, they did a video interview with her as well.
And then little Marco and other, I can't remember who else, other Republicans tried to introduce this on a federal level. Where you would, and this is what, just to extend this story, Ilhan Omar, when those first comments that they tried to censure her for, when she first got into Congress, this is what she was referring to when she said, I'm not going to take some type of pledge to another country. And they made it as if she was accusing Jewish people for having dual loyalty, when in fact she was specifically talking about an attempt on the federal level and one that exists on the state level to literally sign a loyalty pledge that you will not boycott or participate in a boycott or a divestment move of Israel. And all of this has been obscured by
racism against Ilhan Omar.
Racism against Ilhan Omar, obscured by the media that, for whatever reason, and some on the right who are really concerned about...
I was just about to say. I mean, where are the free speech warriors here? They should be pounding the pavement every day.
One would have imagined the IDW would have been trumpeting this. I mean,
Glenn Greenwald, Barry Weiss. I mean, like, they need to be on this. First Amendment
I think Greenwald
warriors.
has spoken out against this. Barry Weiss, not in a million years.
Barry Weiss is like probably working the other end of it.
Of course, without a doubt.
But I mean, I've heard a lot about censorship from her. So.
Yeah, no. The IDW. This is. I mean, talk about the dark web. I mean, this is what they should have been talking about.
It's interesting what gets emphasized and when the dog barks and when the dog doesn't bark on certain things.
That's a good way of putting it. I think you need to grow up in North Dakota to have that saying. All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half. 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's
Stop talking for a second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is this?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go throw up.
Libertarians.
They're so stupid, though.
Common sense says, of course.
gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering. I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-3501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
654 $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
You can call it satire. Sam goes with satire.
On top of it all, my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the week being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Love you, bye.
Love you. Bye-bye.
Oh, we're back?
Yeah, they may have just like switched. They may, we were just talking about
opening this.
I was just saying during the Air America days, I thought that it was not absurd for me to assume that I would get audited or something like that. But then I think that they just like sniffed, and I don't think that happened to anybody at Air America, but there was certainly, that was a very, very tense time, particularly at the beginning, as, there was being associated with people who were speaking out against the war. And I've told the story where Janine and I, for the first 6 to 8 months, through the election, we would leave at 10 p.m. at night on 30th Street in Park with bats. We would walk out with bats because there was still a lot of intense anger. And so I thought at one point I'd get audited, and then I don't know, had they ever even sniffed around, they would have been like, oh,
not that interesting.
We might want to fish in a bigger pond. But nevertheless, all right, let's see. Let's go to the phones, shall we, ladies and gentlemen? Calling from a 510 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Oh my God! Is this my favorite CIA agent, Sam Seder.
I don't know who your favorite CIA agent is, but it is Sam Seder.
Well, you also have my favorite female misogynist, Emma, over there.
Yep, that's me.
It's Jenna.
Oh,
Hi, girl. It's Jenna.
Jenna, I believe either you called or I am before when you were having surgery recently. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I love that you remember. I was calling to give you a couple updates on that.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so my implants are great. It's been 2 months now. They're almost settled, and they look amazing.
That's awesome.
And,
congratulations.
Thank you. And then I also had my facial feminization surgery almost 2 weeks ago.
And that's, you're feeling good after that too?
Surprisingly, I'm healing so well. My head is still pretty swollen, but I'm off the oxys, which is good because I hate the way I feel about that.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've just obviously been watching you guys every day, and of course it really helps with my surgery. It was pretty intense, a lot more intense than I expected.
But what made it so intense? The actual I'm not good with talking about like
You're
surgery.
squeamish.
I'm very squeamish. So don't go there.
Oh, okay.
But I don't go there. Like I can't like
Don't go the Nick on us.
dental stuff or anything like that. I'm not. But what was it? Was it intense in terms of like the actual surgery or just like the experience?
The recovery or the emotion?
Everything.
Yeah.
You kind of, you know, it's these surgeries that you've wanted your whole life. You know, you see these things in your face that is just like, oh, this is too masculine. And it's dysphoria, obviously, it triggers you. But I never knew if I was ever going to have these surgeries, right? So it's a lot of these emotions built up. You're finally getting this surgery that you wanted. But yes, it's also a lot more the physical pain I was expecting, but the emotional aspect of it, I wasn't really ready for because I didn't really know what to experience. And it was the first week, obviously, of course, was the most brutal. You are dealing with lots of headaches, pain. You're having to deal with changing your bandages twice a day. My hair's all kept up in braids. I was really annoyed. You know, you want so bad to see the result, but you have to really stick with the persistence, right? Because you know that you can't be the one that gets in the way of your progress. And so you actually kind of reach like a pretty low because you just see yourself so bleh, you're so ratchet, and you're hurting, and you're on pain meds. But then when I finally got to get my stitches out and I washed my hair out and I was able to do everything I normally did for the most part, it was, I cannot explain the level of just like euphoria. I just broke down crying. It is incredibly emotional. So having you guys there, you know, it's like, I know we don't really know each other, but I feel like I know you guys. And so it really helps. And I just, like I said before, last time I called, I just always really appreciate everything you talk about. So yeah, I love you guys.
All right. Well, congratulations. And hope you continue to recover quickly. Appreciate the call, Jenna.
Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, Emma.
Yes.
Don't let those haters about sports get you down. I told you on Twitter, Raiders are my team. I love football.
Well, that's great. I mean, are you a fan of any team in particular?
Raiders.
Oh, it's really tough because I want Matt Stafford to win. I feel bad that he got stuck on the Lions.
Oh, did you say Raiders? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Oh no, it's all good.
But in the Super Bowl, you have a pick?
Yeah, I'm cool with both.
Me too.
I'd like to see Matt Stafford get something. He got stuck with the Lions for so long. And but I also love Joe Burrow. And I know it's silly, but he's so hot. And he's just really good.
No comment.
I'm cool. No comment. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Jenna.
Appreciate the call, Jenna.
Yeah, no problem. I'll talk to you guys later.
Bye. I can't even think of any type of surgery.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched The Nick with Clive
Yes,
Owen?
I did.
Such a great show.
I literally would have to it was very difficult. I mean, I can't even tell you how ridiculous it was, but I would do this thing where you just go like this.
Can you do gore, like gore movies? I can't. So
gore movies, because I know it's fictional.
So you're in your worst nightmares watching one of those shows on TV like Botched, where they where they
I didn't know that was a show, but that sounds horrible.
It's so essentially it's like the premise, Bradley, is that it's like a plastic surgeon who fixes botched plastic surgery.
Can't do that.
No, okay.
Nope.
I can't do that.
I can't even talk about it.
All right.
I literally in high school had to have my lab partner in biology, where you prick your thing for your blood type.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna be like.
I paid my partner to use their blood.
I thought you were gonna be the kid that passed out from the frog.
Oh God. I don't even want to tell you about that. And the dude who was my partner for that was like, look at and it was not. That was not. No, can't. Let's just move on.
Still remember the smell that day.
Cannot. Call from a 44 area code. You're international caller. I don't know who you are. Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. Is this me?
It is you.
Oh my God. I can't believe I'm on air. I'm calling from the UK.
And what's your name?
Hey, Emma. Hey, the whole crew.
Hello.
Brad.
What's your name? Is Brad?
Fred.
Fred.
Frederick.
Hello, Fred. What's on your mind?
Hi. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. I've been wanting to call the show for a few years. Long time listener.
Okay. Well, all good.
I wanted to ask specifically about inflation because it's going obviously a bit crazy. Well, not crazy like 1970s, but it's the highest we've had historically in the US and the UK. And I'm wondering if you think maybe it could be a good thing because it would push employees to have to bargain for wages. And maybe this would kind of reignite that tendency from workers to bargain with employers. I mean, in the UK, I don't know if you've seen, but the governor of the Bank of England went on an interview the other day to tell people don't bargain for higher wages. That's the solution to inflation, according to him. Whereas he makes £500,000 a year, which is like $750,000. But yeah, just wondering, with inflation, do you think that even if it would cut into people's standards of living, and ultimately I'm in favor of material outcomes through politics just as much as you are, but do you think that it could have a positive impact in creating some social conflict, for lack of a better word?
Well, I can tell you this. I mean, just in terms of as a factual matter, inflation has hit most countries around the world, at least in the industrialized world. I think in the United States, depending on how you measure it, maybe a little bit higher. But wages have gone up on the low end of the wage spectrum in this country by 6 or 7%. There is a great paper that that I was reading recently, and it is I think here, get it right here. Just happened to have it on one of my million things. It is from a whole crew of people about monetary policy and inflation, and essentially there's a theory that what we're experiencing is not true inflation, that it's really a function of the disruption that is caused by COVID in terms of our supply chain. And it has been a lot more durable than I think
At least I suspected it would be. But we still are having, like, you know, random cities in China closing down, like where all the industry happens. And that's going to impact things. We have, you know, weakness in our supply chain.
Gas prices too.
What's that?
Gas prices. I don't know.
Well, gas prices.
In the US,
gas prices have shot up in the past week, and part of that is a function of what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. Part of that is a function of they had rolled back production because there was this sudden drop off in economic activity during the shutdown, and they haven't ramped back up, and they're taking advantage of this. We should say, like, you know, ExxonMobil and other oil companies are having record profits because of it, right? Because they're working that they're sort of arbitraging the cutback in production and the quicker rebounding of demand. But I think over the long term, two things are going to happen. I think one, and even maybe in the midterm, I mean, I think we're probably a year out, somewhere around there, where you're going to start to see prices fall back down into line as production ramps back up, and we hopefully get past, COVID scares. But the wages, I think, are going to remain. And I do think that's going to create tension. And it certainly, in this country, I don't know what's happening in the UK, but in this country, there has been a huge churn in people leaving their low-paying jobs and finding jobs that are paying just a little bit better, or maybe the conditions there are better. And one of the things why I keep pushing back on the narrative that this is regular inflation. I mean, it really, people define it in different ways, but inflation that is a function of demand outpacing. It's
not because of demand.
Well,
yeah, exactly.
Demand has shot back up. Demand has shot back up. It's just that we artificially halted or cut back on production in some instances because we just had demand just fell off a cliff. It's like, look, if I have a restaurant, okay, and on March 13th, 2020, a week later, nobody shows up at my restaurant, I don't have that much of a margin. I'm gonna fire some of my employees. Maybe I'm gonna fire all of them, or I'm gonna close the restaurant because I don't want to pay rent. But let's say I was able to keep it open with a skeletal crew, or I just do takeout. All of a sudden, demand kicks back in. I've got to basically rebuild my business again. I've got to rebuild waiters. I got to retrain the waiters. I've got to get more. I got to find out where I get more chicken, where I get more lettuce, and all of this. And the place I used to get the lettuce is not working.
A temporary shock.
Yes, and
compared to like a long-term overheating of the economy.
Exactly. And I think the proof. But
do you think that the tension, even if it's short-term, like a year or so, if say this temporary inflation goes away, do you think that this could be enough? Since, I mean, in the US, and it's very much the same here in the UK. In fact, we have a massive cost of living crisis. If you look at the news about the UK, it's everywhere. I mean, costs have gone up by like £1,000 to about $1,500 per year per family. And that's just pushed millions into the brink. And I'm guessing with the end of stimulus and government support in the US, if it's the same case, and since a lot of people are feeling the pinch a lot more, and inflation happening at the same time, would that push maybe, I don't know, for people to buy? I mean, I'm a lot more hopeful about the US than the UK because you've got a lot more activity around unions, I would say, with stuff like Amazon. Whereas here, there's a lot of political apathy.
I should tell you that we have a lot of political apathy here, and
not as much as here.
Well, I don't know. Our unionization is.
I'm French too, and France is okay. People protest and go out on the street and do something when the government says life is gonna get more expensive. But in the UK, I mean, and I follow your show all the time, and I follow American politics all the time. You have some reaction from politicians, and we do also in the UK, but there's no popular movements really. I mean, we've got XR, a few things, but we don't have this. So, I mean, I'm a lot more hopeful for what would happen in the US. Obviously, in the UK, we've still got the Conservatives in power, and it's been very depressing, frankly, for many, many years. But that will change.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could share your optimism about this country, to be honest with you. I mean, we just had we just had two members of Congress essentially deny the American public child tax credit, which would have been a $300 a month, more or less, for each family.
Joe Manchin and Cinema?
Yeah, but my point is that, and extended unemployment benefits, there's still talk in Washington that maybe, they just voted in the House to extend the budget for another month, and there's some talk that maybe there's going to be some additional COVID relief in the budget that they ultimately pass. We're not quite clear on what it would be. It could be something like, paid sick leave or back pay or something to that effect, but not much. And you really don't hear much about it from the American public in terms of, like, even though it had a incredibly positive impact on, child poverty in this country, on the ability for people to say, I'm not going to work this crappy job. I'm going to head over to a different job and take that risk and feel like, it didn't mean they didn't have to work, but it did mean that, like, they felt a little bit more confident in positioning themselves. It's just, the gulf between what our government can and do or does do or won't do and how it impacts individual Americans' lives and their awareness of that is pretty wide, it seems to me, in this country, and that is a problem. And it's a failure of on some level of the politicians who, when you pass something like that, you should make the American public be aware of it. And when it fails, you should make the public aware of it. And on some level, I think there's been a failure to do so. But we'll see. I don't know. Well, I don't know what's going to happen.
I think we both. I mean, I think most of the show would agree that the media is responsible in many ways, and I mean,
the media is responsible, but the media is responsible. But the fact is also, if the the media is set up in such a way that they're not going to get out ahead of the Democratic Party in complaining about these things, or they're not going to get out ahead of advocates for it. It's just not the case. And so I agree with you that in a perfect world, the media would be more aggressive about this stuff. But the reality is there is also political players who are bad at what they do in many respects. Appreciate the call. Just to give an example of this.
Thank you.
And Atrios made this point. He did a post today about this story about Glenn Youngkin.
Oh.
About, there was a kid, 17-year-old kid, high school student in Virginia, who posted on Twitter. This kid, Ethan Lynn, retweeted a report from the Richmond Public Radio Station, just retweeted a report from the public radio station suggesting that Youngkin might be scrapping efforts pursued under two previous governors, Northam and Democrat Terry McAuliffe, to highlight the history of enslaved people at the governor's executive mansion. And apparently, the report contained an error. Lynn noted this on Twitter's hour later when the correction was issued.
Yes, the 17-year-old high school student noted the correction.
But before then, then, Team Youngkin, which is the official Twitter account for Youngkin's campaign. I just want you to imagine if, like, I don't know, if AOC. Team AOC did this.
After a Covington Catholic kid.
Yeah. But never mind that. Like, somebody who's completely not even in the news. Like, or, Team Pelosi or Team Clinton or team whomever, doesn't matter. They attacked this kid, posting a photo of the teen with Northam taken at a Democratic fundraiser in October. Here's a picture of Ethan with a man that had blackface KKK photo in his yearbook, Team Youngkin tweeted. Pairing the October photo with a racist picture from Northam in 1984.
Responding to this 17-year-old kid on Twitter.
Now, if it was Team AOC that did this to a random Republican teenager who retweeted a report from, let's say, public radio or Fox or wherever, this would be the news of the day. Yeah. You would not be able to put Twitter on. You would not be able to put Instagram on. You would not be able to turn on the TV where you would not hear about this.
Tucker would be on location.
Tucker would be on location. The kid's picture would be Tucker would be there defending them.
He and Kyle Rittenhouse would be doing like a joint venture at a Turning Points USA, speaking together, holding hands in the air.
There would be a multi-million-dollar GoFundMe to sue, and to charge and lawsuits and it is perfectly, well, not perfectly, but it is certainly understandable for people to say the Democrats aren't incompetent. They secretly don't want any of their agenda to pass, et cetera, et cetera. I can understand that. I think it's wrong and it's misguided and it's silly, but I can understand how someone would say that. But this is evidence of failing to take advantage of the moment. I mean, there should be, some of these outside expenditure groups, there should be a concerted effort to take a piece out of Youngkin right now from this, attacking teenagers. This is what you do. You don't just wait 2 years, 4 years until the election comes. You start to take a piece out of this guy right now. That's just politics. And so in that respect, they're bad at it. They're bad at it both in terms of that, and they're bad at it in saying George Bush, Donald Trump, when George Bush sent out $300 one time.
Yeah.
In 2003, was it? Some type of tax rebate. Maybe it was 2006. I can't remember. It was a note from George Bush in your check. And this is, the Democrats passed a bill that gave parents $300 per kid for the better part of the year. And then they just walked away and never talked about it again.
How about the fact, there's a fairly direct comparison here. Glenn Youngkin's son, who's also 17, tried to vote. What was it, twice?
Twice.
For his father?
Yes.
If we're going to scold teenage boys with official campaign messaging.
And Glenn Youngkin was like, how could the media do this? And he went out on an all-out tour to basically say, why are you attacking my son? And have we heard anything? I shouldn't say that. Have we heard anything from the Democratic Party?
Yep.
Yeah, no. And that's how you make the media, in the way that you were responding to the caller. The media is not going to take up an issue for the Democrats unless they push it. And Republicans are experts at that, and Democrats are terrible at it.
Terrible.
Yeah. I think people, the media is all owned by capitalists, too. I think people shouldn't expect, them to just be on the side of social justice just because that's the right thing to do.
I don't know. Do I want to give the Biden administration points for even ever bringing this up? Or do I take points away from them sending out Jill Biden to announce that,
Dr. Jill Biden.
Dr. Jill Biden sent out to announce that one of the key campaign promises by Joe Biden died on the vine. Here is... Jill Biden at the Association of Community College Trustees legislative summit saying like, maybe in 20 years.
Joe has also had to make compromises. Congress hasn't passed the Build Back Better legislation yet. And free community college is no longer part of that package. We knew that this wasn't going to be easy. Joe always said that. Still, like you, I was disappointed because, like you, these aren't just bills or budgets to me, to you, right? We know what they mean for real people, for our students. And it was a real lesson in human nature that some people just don't get that.
Well, that's great. Everyone can take their lesson in human nature and see if they can mail it in with their college loan or to pay for their community college or their four-year college. Joe Biden didn't say it wasn't going to be easy, but he said, you watch. 6 months in, I get these guys. It's an abject failure. And what Joe Biden could do, what he could do without Congress, and maybe this is also a lesson in human nature. He could, literally with a stroke of a pen, get rid of college debt in this country. He could get rid of $10,000 worth of college debt. He could get rid of $20,000 worth of college debt. He could get rid of all college debt. He could, if he needs to worry about putting some type of means test on it and wanted to waste the money associated with that, as opposed to just getting it back in taxes. He could do that. He could do any of that.
In fact, that would be easy.
And this delusion of Build Back Better is we haven't passed it yet. Like, what is the theory behind this? Who that pays attention to Jill Biden talking about Build Back Better believes that Build Back Better is ever going to pass? Like, who is the, how tiny is the circle of people, the Venn diagram of people who both are interested in what Jill Biden's saying at this thing and also follow the Build Back Better bill, that believe that it's going to pass soon in any meaningful way?
The deluded part of me is wants to believe that she has some inside knowledge that maybe Manchin's coming back to the table, but that's not the case. I mean, I pray, I wish, but you got to put one more Venn diagram in there. That's the deluded part of people. You're right. I mean, honestly, the fact that she was the one who was deployed to just casually say, yeah, free community college is dead. Even if they're talking about resurrecting Build Back Better, that's not going to be in it then. And she kind of just let that slip in the speech to the Association of Community College Trustees. It's just weird. Well, they wants to make it. She wants to basically make it clear that they're upset about it.
In which case, you say the lesson is not one in human nature; it's one in party leadership politics and how we get certain members of the party on board. The idea it's all about Manchin's human nature. No, it's about his dumb. Well, now,
here's another thing. If you're actually going to deploy, Dr. Biden to go out and say this, I understand she obviously cares about education. I mean, she's a teacher, et cetera, et cetera. Here's what you do when you're, let's say, I don't know, invested in politics. This is why we need more Democrats. I mean, at least, at least make an effort, right? To not the answer isn't human nature. The answer is we don't have enough votes. Not a function of human nature. Or you could say this is about corruption. I mean, it is the worst of every possible world in which she presents this. And the way that she presents this, I mean, what is the message? It's just it's just human nature to not want to support a citizenry that can get college without going into massive debt. That's human nature. What's weird is the humans who live in other countries, they don't have that same dynamic.
Also, the human nature of the people that would benefit from community college in this country seems to be a little bit different than the human nature of most of the 100 senators that are making these decisions that would affect their lives.
Human nature. That is almost about as offensive as you can make it, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah, well, it's also a Michael Jackson song, so
She's
trying to get canceled, too.
Is it?
Yeah.
Right,
Human nature.
Never heard that.
I
never knew the titles of any of those songs.
Do you want me to sing it?
No. I mean, I probably recognize the song, but I don't ever learn song titles.
I don't. That's interesting.
I've listened to albums. There's albums I've listened to literally hundreds upon hundreds of times. Like Replacement's "Let It Be." That album, I must have listened to that in my college days, like literally like 1,000 times. Like I can tell you the sound of the song. I could explain.
Can you say the lyrics? Because that usually is a good indicator what the song's titled.
I can barely say the lyrics, and I certainly don't know the titles of any of those songs. Barely. Maybe some, but barely. Barely. It's just...
my mental block is restaurant names.
It's not a mental block. I never tried.
Okay.
I just I can look it up. So why do I need to know?
I mean, you can discern from the lyrics. Like, if you're listening to Let It Be by the Beatles, you might understand that's the title of the song. Okay, I know, but it just came to mind as a song example.
Well, yeah. Let It Be by the Beatles. It's a little more straightforward.
All right.
This is interesting. We played yesterday Mike Pence giving a speech in front of the Federalist Society saying, like, it wasn't something I could do. One man can't change an election.
Yeah. He chose to speak out about that 14 months later because I guess he was frozen in carbonite or whatever.
He had just heard that Donald Trump thought that he should have changed the outcome of the election. He just heard that.
The carrier pigeon got delayed.
Exactly. I've been in a forced media blackout for the past 13 months. After January 6th, I was like, people were telling me, like, what? Like, I was going to ask, like, what are they doing here?
Mother had him locked in the closet. It was sensory deprivation.
And I said, this is what Pence did. He said, why are all these people crashing into the Capitol? Oh, don't tell me.
Right.
I don't want to know. And then he just maintained that until like 2 days ago. And he came out and he said, and obviously there's some type of polling. There's something going on.
Because Marco Rubio did this too. We also played this yesterday.
Rubio.
Same thing that Pence said.
I'm not liking this.
Let's make it about Kamala Harris.
And
circling the wagons on me.
And then, of all people, yesterday, it's just an amazing coincidence. As if like somebody sent out some notes on this. It really is fascinating.
I bet they did.
I bet you they did too, because here's Brian Kilmeade bringing it up on his radio show. Now, let's play this. This is on his radio show, not on his much bigger program on Fox and Friends. Here it is on the radio show. Brian Kilmeade.
Hey, Logan, you're watching on Fox Nation. Thank you for that. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Go ahead.
So you were talking to a couple guests ago about Donald Trump, and he keeps talking about 2020, and it really concerns me that he might get the nomination for the Republican Party, and he's going to continue to talk about that, and it could cost us in 2024. I was watching him in his rally a couple of weeks ago in Arizona, and the first thing he comes out and starts talking about is the 2020 election. And it's almost cringeworthy that he keeps talking about it. It was so bad. I mean, I had to turn it off. I couldn't watch it anymore. And I'm a huge Trump supporter.
Listen, I can't tell you. I was with one of his best friends, his same age, and he called them up after two of them, and they did it to me separately. After that Arizona rally, not Texas, they said Texas was better, but after the Arizona rally, they called him up and said that was the worst speech you ever gave, because nobody cares about your topics. You have to go. There's so much to talk about that matters to you and I, Logan, right now, about what's happening in the Ukraine, how China is just forgetting about phase one, how they're beginning to militarize everything around them, about to take Taiwan back, what's happening here in this country with these spending programs and blowing up the filibuster and judges and what he's doing in terms of blowing up warp speed and continuing these restrictions. That's what people want to talk about. It's not hard stuff. You can honestly say, this is what I did to the border. This is what I was trying to do at the border. This is what I'm able to do. Since I left, Republicans have gained in Hispanic votes past almost where Bush was in 2000. I mean, there's so much legitimate things to talk about. And I could not care less about party politics. I care about America. Right now, nobody cares about 2020. Nobody. And everything that he said and the challenges that he made should have been done before the election. And they did a recount in Arizona, and the recount showed no difference almost. And he came out and said it showed that they won Arizona. That's an outright lie. And please stop wasting our time with that, because he's capable of doing so much more. Thanks for watching.
Now, listen, I want to tell you something about the radio business. Apparently, they stream this on Fox Nation, which is their internet thing. In the radio business, and we actually have the ability with this, but we just don't do it. You call in, a producer takes your name, where you calling from, what do you want to talk about?
Screens.
And that producer, he screens, and he'll talk to you or she'll talk to you for a couple minutes, and they'll get a sense. And then the producer will write into an interface, tell Brian, he's got a list of 15 callers, maybe 20 callers, maybe at least 10, 15, 20. They want to talk about this. Kill Me does not take that phone call. It's not like the way we do it here, where it's like, oh, I can see your area code and just, I don't know who you are. Tell me what you want to talk about. They know exactly what they're talking about. Kill Me doesn't take that unless he wants to get that message out. They are very afraid. And, you know, I've been saying for a long time, frankly, about this. They are very afraid that a combination of the January 6th hearings and Donald Trump having to insinuate himself into that debate, that's the part that they're worried about. That Trump will take the bait and go in. He can't help
himself.
He can't help himself.
Come on.
And they are afraid of that because they must now have some data that this is inhibiting something.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, it's trying to build some type of narrative to reach Trump and get him to stop. Kilmeade saying I'm with Trump's best friend, that's going to drive Trump insane. That's going to drive Trump insane. And now I don't know. We'll see if Kilmeade talks about this on Fox and Friends. This is the real test. If he really wants to reach Trump, he'll do it. But that is what is known as a test balloon, ladies and gentlemen. There is some clarion call going on. It's fascinating to watch this.
I mean, I would guess that there are some people with Trump close to him, like saying, we cannot get through to him. We can't get through to him.
I mean,
like everyone,
everybody.
Yeah. Well, I just that means that he is not fully surrounded by sycophants that are going to also tell everyone else what he is saying, right? And just regurgitate his delusions. There are some people who are like, well, we also want to win. We have skin in the game. I
wonder who his best friend is.
He has nobody close to him.
I wonder if it's that Barack guy, the Tom Barack. Is that it? That wasn't one of his close friends. I wonder. I mean, man, talk about how paranoid would Trump feel? I was like, oh, Emma, I was hanging out with your best friend the other day, and we were just talking about how wrong you are about your who should be in the Hall of Fame. I wouldn't worry about it.
I'll talk about how much your stuff sucks these days.
Yeah. Your takes on the show.
We were just like, Emma's she can't gamble. She can't even bet. She can't even score one decent week on FanDuel or whatever it is.
I mean, this is this would not hurt me because, to be honest, this was my reality this weekend. and shouldn't bet on basketball.
Oh,
but
yeah, no, Emma's really bad at basketball. That's the thing. She's got to move on from basketball and stick with betting on football.
No, but like
that's what your best friends.
But to really get at my core, you would have to like you do political media. You and someone else that I admire in the space saying that my takes are really bad.
Oh, did I say me?
Yeah.
No, I meant that ESPN commentator was talking to your best friend, and they said like you really didn't know what you were talking about. It was hard to listen. I wouldn't worry about it.
Shit.
I wouldn't worry about it.
Just even the hypotheticals is like making my hair stand up on the back of my neck.
Joke's on you, Brian. I don't have friends anymore.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? At least I have friends. Trump just doesn't have that.
No
in his
new
life.
friends, no old friends.
No.
It's a great deployment from Kilmeade of the Trump. Like, many people are saying like anonymous person is talking.
A lot of people are saying it. I'm not saying it, but other people were saying it to me, and I'm just repeating what they said to me. It's interesting that that's going on like that. Which one else should we do here?
You know, I'm like always partial to making fun of something like, I don't know, Jimmy Dore saying to vote for libertarians.
Yeah, okay, but I want to do one more. Let's talk about this. This is like sort of hot person I don't care for versus person I don't care for action. Tucker Carlson on Fox reacting to Joe Scarborough, referring to the Canadian truck convoy as a cult. The bottom line is a lot of Joe Scarborough's old friends, current friends, right-wingers have contributed a ton of money to this Canadian trucker revolt, as it were. And it seems like from some of the news reports I've seen that the Canadian cops that have been working them have been a lot more sort of kid glovey with these folks than they have been with a lot of other protesters. That may sound familiar to you. We saw that in terms of, the reaction that we had to those people who were storming the Capitol. There's some good reporting out there about the money that's been raised. I think even Greg Abbott from Texas was raising money for these Canadians. But here is Tucker Carlson, and these two used to be buddies on MSNBC back in the day when it was
cat fight,
when it was Scarborough country. Here is Tucker Carlson.
What would happen if American truck drivers decided they'd had enough of people like Joe Scarborough and went on strike? What would happen then?
Pause it for one second.
This country would stop.
Tell me what the difference between Joe Scarborough and Tucker Carlson is.
Yeah, very little.
I mean, to be fair, I don't know if Joe Scarborough's dad donated a ton of money to get him into the college that he went into. I don't know, to be fair, if Joe Scarborough had to date the headmaster of his second prep school, the one after the Swiss one, to get him into college. I don't know that, to be fair to Scarborough. But
did Joe Scarborough's dad work for Voice of America?
Did Joe Scarborough's dad work for the Public Broadcasting Corporation just a couple of years before Joe Scarborough got a show on there? I'm pretty sure it did not happen. The Joe Scarborough's dad, as a political operative after marrying a billionaire heiress, maybe a $100 million heiress, go and lobby for Viktor Orban just before Joe Scarborough went out and did a documentary about how great things are going in Hungary? I don't think so. But besides that, what is the difference between these two?
I mean, they are both Republican television hosts, or at least Scarborough has been a Republican in the past.
Oh, he is still a Republican.
And they're both millionaires, and they're both white guys. And I don't know.
Probably thought, I don't know if Joe thought this, but they both probably thought the Chicago teachers were overreacting and should get into the schools and teach even if they're sick.
Without a doubt. All right, so go back to Tucker. I'm really curious as to people like Joe Scarborough.
Yeah,
people exactly like him.
Exactly.
What would happen if American truck drivers decided they'd had enough of people like Joe Scarborough and went on strike? What would happen then? Well, this country would stop immediately. No more deliveries of anything. Over time, that would mean starvation for people in the cities. But even in the short term, there would be profound suffering in this country. For example, and this is something that too few people outside of television even consider, the world's entire supply of Botox is manufactured on the west coast of Ireland. That's a long way from here. In fact, it's a 4,000-mile-long supply chain from the Allergan plant in Westport, Ireland, to Jupiter, Florida. Now, people at MSNBC might not be aware of this, but our country has no domestic Botox production. Along with vitamin C and antibiotics, it's one of the life-saving pharmaceutical products we have recklessly offshored. So if the trucks stop delivering, the Botox stops coming. And suddenly your morning television anchors are going to look like they're 58 years old, which actually they are. Could that happen? Is it impossible? No, it's not impossible. The people in charge aren't really thinking this through. Most of the time, trends start in the United States and they move north to Canada. But this time, the opposite could happen.
You know, I got to say, this is unbelievable because there's no doubt in my mind they're all shot up with Botox.
Tucker has 100%. I mean, there's fake tan going on there. I wonder where the
I don't know if
orange
there's fake tan going on because he's got a place in Florida. He was just down there having dinner with Bush. But I will say this. I am envious of Tucker, who I believe is about my age. Not a gray hair. How does he manage to do that?
Where's the hair dye manufactured?
And
Need truckers for that.
I should also tell you, if Botox production is offshored, it's not going to matter in terms of the trucks. You're going to need a boat. I don't know if you know how that works.
When he said 4,000 miles away, I was like, there's a sea of water in between that. Trucks can't go over that.
The difference between Tucker and Joe Scarborough, the amount of daylight between these two guys, you couldn't slide a piece of paper through.
And the sort of culture war between them distracts from the real issues that face Canadian truck drivers particularly. There's a CBC News article, Convoy Protests Ignoring Real Hardships Truckers Face. Appeal drivers warn driver abuse, wage theft, some of the most pressing issues, Tucker said, and also safety things. So what do you think if we come and join this convoy, which basically is like all this safety stuff for COVID is authoritarianism? Do you think you can actually address the real things that truckers did? Or do you think it's actually some way to obscure those things?
Of course. Yeah. Of course. And I just so fascinating to me how Tucker gets away with this idea of like this elite Botox guy. This guy owns at least 3 homes. He dines with George Bush. His money and his parents' money bought his way through everything from the St. George prep school he went to to the one that he went to in Newport, Rhode Island, where all the mansions are. This guy, there's you want to talk about a silver spoon. And it's not like his life is any different than Joe's right now. They are twins.
And Tucker cares so much about the rights and the protections for truckers throughout the world, and especially in this country, that he definitely has spoken out about the fact that unionization among truck drivers has been undercut at every turn, and there has been an effort to contract out truck drivers as opposed to giving them actual protections and wages, right? He's been open and vocal about that?
Yeah, of course. I'm sure. It's just fascinating to me the game that Tucker plays and how successful he is at pretending like he's anything other than the elite he rails against. It's almost impossible. I mean, he would literally have to be like genetic royalty to be more elite than he is.
Habsburg.
Honestly.
He literally wanted to work for the CIA, and his dad, who worked for Voice of America, said, no, join the media because they'll take anybody.
Well, no, that was because he got rejected from the CIA.
Right, yeah.
Rejected deep state applicant, Tucker Carlson. Odd.
Calling from a 507 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Sam from Minnesota.
Sam from Minnesota. Always a pleasure to meet someone so well named.
Yeah, I agree. A big fan of your show. I've been listening for a couple years now. A couple weeks ago, you said something during a Jimmy Dore clip. And I'm not agreeing with Jimmy Dore on this, but I thought you said something that was, or you suggested something that was pretty false and widely known as false. So I wanted to bring it to your attention.
Thank you.
Because it's something that I'm really interested in. And so it was that clip, it was like a Dr. John Campbell video that Jimmy Dore was talking about. And it was,
this is where he did the numbers of excess deaths versus the numbers of people who came into the hospital with COVID and the number of people who died just of COVID or something to that effect.
Yeah, exactly. And, you had said with the pandemic, what else, was going on in this time? And you had said like, oh, well, maybe traffic fatalities have been down. But that was like not the case when the pandemic started, even though driving went down. In both like fatalities per miles driven and just like the overall number of fatalities. And I think that's been like pretty widely like.
Well, I saw a Wall Street Journal. Sorry to cut you off, Sam, but I saw a Wall Street Journal article from I think a week ago that talked about how much vehicular fatalities have increased.
The amount?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I kind of sort of have a problem with, like what's been reporting, like I see a lot of articles that are like speeding, reckless driving, and like drunk driving. People are using substances more. That's like, but I think that like takes away from the fact that like we have roads and streets that are just like designed for high speeds. And so, like, if there's, at the beginning of the pandemic, and it's changed a little bit now, we're kind of back up to the same amount of drivers we had pre-pandemic. I think there might be some differences of when they're driving. People's schedules are changed, so it might be spread out more, which, creates less traffic and still higher speeds. But I think that, like, narrative that, oh, it's, just there's more people that are drinking and driving and just being reckless and not caring, is kind of, it takes away from the fact that, like, we just have roads and streets that are designed for these super high speeds, yet there's like complexity in them, lots of turning and so I think that, I don't know, I kind of get upset when there's like that narrative. It should be like, hey, we need to make our streets designed safer.
Okay, so the point you're making is that, in fact, as we're looking at least in the context of the UK, that there was not a diminishment of car fatalities during that time. That's what you're saying was incorrect.
I'm not exactly sure.
I am just making sure that I have what you said correct. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying that's what you're talking about, though. When I was talking about when we were measuring excess deaths, I speculated that there was a chance that there would be a diminishment of excess deaths as a function of car fatalities, and there weren't. It's more or less the same in 2020.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, yep.
That was your point.
Yeah.
Okay, I stand corrected.
And I guess the other point that just like, I wish that more people just talked about, hey, we can design our roads safer. Have you ever heard of a strode?
But wait a second. So it's really, you're taking an issue with, but the point was really about COVID and COVID deaths.
Not really. It was just like kind of like that's how it got brought up. That's how you started talking. Well, you didn't really talk about. All right,
Sam made an ancillary point about like
potential
fatalities, and he was wrong. But it doesn't seem like that was really the crux of his argument.
Yeah,
Sam.
it was about, we were talking about COVID, not traffic safety, right?
Yeah, and I just kind of wanted to bring up traffic safety because you you guys do talk about like walkability and stuff, and I always appreciate when you do. And,
all right, so fair enough. So what is your in terms of traffic fatalities? What did you want to say?
What's a strode?
So a strode is a street and a road that's combined. So roads, high-speed connections between places. Streets are, places where people are supposed to live. And a strode is something that's trying to do both. So, like, think of these 2-lane roads with tons of turns, tons of stoplights, the basically suburban sprawl. And we have so much of it. And I guess my ultimate point is that we're not, like, there's not enough news articles and, like, things in the media about, like, that being the ultimate factor that's, responsible for this increase of deaths that we saw in the spring of 2020. People are quick to blame, people just being reckless and like speeding and things, of that nature. Not that, well, okay, when we had, so many cars on the road, traffic kind of was just like a natural, it was actually something that helped save lives because there was like much slower speeds. When you took that away, we have these roads that are designed for, really like 45 miles is, an hour is a fast speed.
Fair enough. I've never encountered a caller, or really anyone for that matter, so eagerly willing to discuss traffic and road safety. But
hey, look, cars
point taken.
Suck.
Yeah,
cars are a bad invention.
But agreed on cars and our traffic sucking for sure.
All right. Well, Sam, appreciate the call. Did not go where I thought it was going to go. Appreciate that. But yes, I'll keep in mind about the strodes.
And if you have, I have a reading recommendation if you are interested in that, if you ever had him on the podcast, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer.
Okay.
By Chuck Maroon.
Okay. All right, great.
Thank you.
Socialist Bear IMs. To learn more about strodes, see the YouTube channel Strong Towns and Not Just Bikes. Is this me? Says maybe having screen calls wouldn't be such a terrible idea. Infertile Turtle, I've never heard of a strode, but have you heard of a chode? I don't know what that means.
Are you doing a bit?
What, when I don't know?
When you don't know, are you playing up the boomer thing?
No, I don't know what that means.
Okay.
I'll find out in a second.
No,
I'll be afraid to look at this. I hope there's no pictures. Okay, there we go. I just never heard of that. Oh, no. Oh, the paranunum. Okay. All right. Look, I've lived I try and, avoid that type of stuff. Don't forget about Tucker's membership in the Harvey Milk Assassin fan club. By the way, is 58 the number? Why is 58 the number he came up with? I would imagine that's what the age of either Scarborough or Mika Brzezinski is. He's what? How old is he? He's got to be like my age, right?
He's 52, Tucker.
He's only 52.
They look like they could be like literal brothers, Joe Scarborough and Tucker Carlson, right? They both have the same preppy hair.
He was that young.
It looked like they were on the same rowing team in the 80s.
They both totally tossed the lacrosse ball around after prep school.
Hinkle's reading list. I just want to shout out the Richmond area Starbucks Workers Union, who have now upped their game from 3 to 5 stores unionizing. Y'all are amazing, kicking ass.
Well, let me just quickly give an update on the Starbucks thing, because I just saw breaking news from the New York Times that Starbucks has fired several workers. Oh, great. Very, very timely stuff, Bradley. Starbucks has fired several workers involved in union organizing at the store in Memphis. The company says they violated safety and security policies, and the union says the firings are in retaliation for organizing, which is illegal, very illegal.
This is where having a multiple appointments to the National Labor Relations Board is going to make a difference, and we're going to see. We'll see how this plays out. Emma's cashew addiction. A poll of theirs showed only half their audience thinks the Republican Party is elitist, while 94% think the Dems are pathetic. But dream ain't mine. But the dream ain't mine.
Sam, you bleary-eyed statue of male impotence. You look like every before picture ever taken. I'll bet these days you get about as hard as an overripe raspberry in the midsummer sun. Anyway, I love the show and wanted to ask in all sincerity, what is, like, actually wrong with your face?
I love whoever you are. I love that format of the IM.
Nicole from Buffalo. What do you mean? I'm joking. Matt Walsh's transgender honeypot operation already compromised. The Twitter account is suspended. I can't seem to find a website. Might be interesting if someone were to snatch up the address.
Might be interesting, yes.
Let's get Ronald Reagan on the Supreme Court. I can see it now. Ruling on Seder versus Pacific Northwest apples.
On the experience level, he's very, up there with Amy Coney Barrett. So
Vincent Van Gogh. Someone yesterday mistakenly identified Ms. Vigeland's celebrity twin as Alexis Bledel. They were wrong. It's the young Gwyneth Paltrow.
I've gotten that before, actually, but that's very, very generous. I'm also, I have brown eyes and brown hair. People realize this, right? But okay.
Jonathan Armstead, why are we hearing more about the NAACP's Sharon Eiffel being a Supreme Court candidate? I think it would be good symmetry as Thurgood Marshall went from there to the court, and it would counterbalance Clarence Thomas taking that seat. Michelle Alexander is also a good out-of-left-field candidate. Because I just don't think that Joe Biden's going to do out-of-left-field candidates. Governor HVAC. Just want to call attention to the case of Pamela Moses here in Tennessee, who was just sentenced to 6 years in prison for trying to register to vote, not knowing she was ineligible due to a past felony. She was erroneously told by officials that her voting rights had been restored. No surprise that she's a BLM activist. Wow. Will you pull that story, Bradley? Patrick from Worcester. Union related. Oh, yes. I just read this in the Intercept and was going to talk about it. We'll talk about it tomorrow. So St. Vincent's Hospital, as you know, the nurses, about 600 or 700 of them, went on strike, and they were on strike for, it must have been about 9 to 10 or 11 months. And we supported some of their strike fund here. Sunset Lake also supported their strike fund. Both my sisters were born in that hospital. You had Marty Walsh actually go there. I think even Pelosi showed up in support. The hospital is owned by this hospital conglomerate called Tenet out of Texas. And they've been doing this. Apparently that Tenet buys up a lot of these like sort of Catholic hospitals and slashes the nursing staff and the support staff. So they hired a bunch of scabs while these nurses were on strike. They only could get about like 250, I think. But what they did is they got the scabs to join the union to attempt to decertify the union. So they're holding a vote to decertify the union in an attempt to basically punish these nurses.
Jesus.
I don't know, we'll talk a little more about it tomorrow. I don't know what else, to tell you, but if you're a nurse in Worcester, don't vote to decertify the union. That just got you that new contract. Majority Report wardrobe coordinator. I read a summary of the Tinder swindler. It sounds like a real-life version of Barney Stinson's Lorenzo von Matterhorn scan from How I Met Your Mother.
I don't know anything about
I don't either. You don't know the song titles and you're a fan of the Replacements, huh? That's what I like about you, Sam. I mean, I know, I remember a couple of them. Unsatisfied. Gary's Got a Boner. What is it?
Sons of No One.
Bastards of.
Bastards of Young.
That's a cover. That's a Bastards of the Young. I Will
Dare.
I Will Dare. I could probably go through them. What is it? Androgynous off of Let It Be. Let me see what else. Waitress in the Sky, but I don't think that's on Let It Be, actually. It might be on Waitress in Let It Be. Androgynous, Unsatisfied, I Will Dare, Gary's Got a Boner. Wait, Is that Gary's got a boner or got his tonsils? What,
I'm watching your mind work. It's like poetry.
It's been a long time. Great album, though. I mean, maybe the best album. Benny Peepino. Let's say hypothetically that I wrote a book about picking up a bodacious babes. Let's also say that it was a fact that bodacious babes are the best babes. Since facts don't care about feelings, you need to let me preform at the MRLive show after Slavoj banned Pure Ideology before Grimes. Any word on CK Louis, the comedian, yet? Shore app. This is a strange message. I've lived in Wyoming my whole life. Being represented by conservative pieces of garbage like Barrasso and Cheney has always been the norm. And it's not changing anytime soon, as a lot of young people have for decades been moving out of the state, with only retirees or Southern white people moving in. Both groups being predominantly conservative. I do find small solace in telling them to wear their mask properly when they come into the casino where I work, as almost all tribal casinos, like the ones I work at, have mandatory mask mandates. Ray, Sam, you'll be on Doom tonight with Matt Binder. Yes. Marco Spaghetti, will Silver Fox Cedar please beat me up? Respectfully, of course.
We have a tweet from Dave Weigel. Most of my Canadian trucker news is coming from American Twitter. Surprised to learn that Trudeau's position is overwhelmingly popular, much more than Biden's right now. If you think he's about to resign in disgrace, you're probably not Canadian.
Token Funger. I think it's clear that conservatives on the court are clearly taking founders' point of view to the Constitution, and us CRT people know full how the founders felt about black people voting. I'm sending Jimmy Dore that clip of you saying a new world order. He should be able to make a couple of deep state videos with it. Charlie, does the guest think they'll strike down affirmative action? We'll have him back on. Greg, people are saying that I've been fired from the RM Brown video vlog. Is that just an ugly rumor? Thank you for getting the truth out there, Sam. I have no idea what that means. Ghislaine Maxwell. My schedule has recently opened up. I'm very charming, and I would love to work as a promoter for the live show. I need work remotely as I can't leave where I'm staying. Hope that won't be an issue. Mercedes, the first Starbucks in Texas, has petitioned to unionize here in San Antonio. It's pretty big, and the two city council members have already shown support.
Nice.
Terry Castillo and Yellen McKee Rodriguez. Melancholy. I was wearing my MR Left is Best hoodie yesterday, and a woman yelled at me, "The left sucks." She yelled twice because I didn't register she was yelling at me. All these years, I've never understood how you've been able to be as confrontational as you are. I tend to shy away from confrontation, but when she yelled at me, I actually felt empowered to know that it was written on my jacket. It struck a nerve. I yelled back freedom and laughed. She drove off. Thanks, Sam. Well, you're welcome. J-Man Raps. Hey, guys, Emma watching you talk about misogyny on Thursday in sports media reminded me how much abuse women get online in general. Nomiki really helped me understand it better, that it's not some Hillary Clinton woke thing. Left is best.
For sure.
Puffin Beard. Oh my God, I didn't realize what time it is. Sam, watching the second interview with Annelle Sheline touched on the subject of the United States' ability to compete economically globally is almost exclusively through arms sales.
Yeah.
Would be interested if you could bring on some people to interview about this topic in relation to the drug war in Latin America. Two people I would like to suggest are Todd Miller. I feel like we've interviewed him. Border Patrol Nation and Build Bridges, Not Walls. Todd Miller and Don Paley, who has written 2 books on the subject, Drug War, Capitalism, and Organized Violence, Capitalist Warfare in Latin America. Bradley, will you take those 2 names?
It's such an important point, too, because like that's the Chinese government is making relationships internationally by basically promising economic investment and making these partnerships in that way. And the United States is frustrated that its old ways of imperial power and weapon sales is not doing the trick anymore. And guess which way is going to win out in the end? So like all this pearl clutching about, China taking over the world, it's because their way of doing things right now is a lot better than the way that we've been doing things. It's just we're a dying empire, and it's the hallmark of it. And by taking over the world, you just mean like dominating economically? Being the new world power. I mean, and I don't particularly care if the United States is no longer the world power anymore. The idea that people are that concerned about that, I mean, it makes sense if you're in power, but shouldn't affect us.
All right, final phone call of the day. I'm sorry. Calling from a 512 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Hey, boy.
Hey, this is Noah from Austin, Texas.
Noah from Austin, Texas. What's on your mind, Noah? Got to be quick.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about multi-party democracy today.
Oh, I have a feeling this is not going to be quick, but okay, go ahead.
I mean, I can make it quick, or at least as quick as is reasonable. So I've only been watching the show for a few months, so apologies if this is already covering well-trodden ground. But a lot of the times, people here on the left, and to some extent, people on the far right as well, have a lot of vitriol against their respective parties. And I just find it interesting that the people who have angst against Democrats and the people on the far right who have angst against Republicans tend to not think about the structural components of our democracy that make the party inherently two-system or two-party, and eliminate the idea of third parties being viable. So, like, a potential guest, I'm not sure if you're already familiar with him, but somebody who is very in the weeds on these is Lee Drutman at New America. And he has a book about how we can reform our democracy without any constitutional amendments that would make it so that third parties are inherently viable. And
so things like ranked choice voting or stuff like that?
Ranked choice voting is one, yeah. But that's not in and of itself enough, just because of the idea of gerrymandering and other kinds of structuring districts that kind of can get around ranked choice voting. So another idea is multi-member representative districts. So you combine like 5 or 6 districts together into one, and then allocate them proportionally according to what percentage of the vote each party within that district gets.
Okay, right. Okay, I understand that. I feel like there might be something like analogous in the English system. I think they have something to that along those lines, I think.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure if.
But let me ask you this. I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like, and even in the one of the bills that the Democrats were unable to get passed in terms of restoring the Voting Rights Act, there were provisions in there that I think also inhibited the opportunity for third parties in terms of like raising the threshold of the amount of money that you need to raise to qualify for matching funds, which is, I think is problematic. And in matching funds would certainly help, and publicly financed elections would also help. Although I think to a certain extent, we've seen evidence that you can raise, particularly for, you can raise a lot of money from small donors, which is helpful. But who do you anticipate? I understand, like, you don't need a constitutional amendment for this, and presumably you raise that because you're arguing that the bar to this type of change is not that high. But the problem is that we have, particularly in this day and age, is that members of both these parties are not going to vote to give themselves less power.
Right, and that's the inherent problem inhibiting these kinds of changes. But I guess my point is that a change like this would have to be fundamentally grassroots. It would have to start at the ground level and become a swell that representatives would have to then listen to. And I feel like not really that many influential political pundits are really talking about it that much. And I just find that kind of surprising that nobody's really pressuring elected members of Congress to make these kinds of changes. Now, there are some members of Congress that I think would be amenable to these kinds of changes. There are a lot of people who are elected.
But here's, let me tell you what my frustration is, okay, in my experience.
Okay.
The Green Party, for instance, has been around now for 35, at least 30 years. And in the first like 5 or 10 years, they were focused on more local races. I think they were, I can't remember when they were at their peak. Sometimes it was mayors, but the state reps. And then in the past, like really the past like 20 years, it feels like, so much of the Green Party's resources are going towards these failed presidential elections. When if they deployed their resources in a way to figure out, one, 2, 3, 4 congressional races across the country that they legitimately could win, and deploy their resources there, and could actually, you know, like, if you already go into office, and I don't know if it should be, but let's just presume that it's a valid pursuit to change the two-party structure. That's your number one agenda. I don't know if you're necessarily representing your constituents in that way, but let's just presume like that would be the way to do it, right?
Sure.
You get a couple of federally elected people in the lowest hanging branches, and you do that. You know, Bernie Sanders did it as an independent, but it wasn't. You know, his agenda was just a sort of like wasn't really about, you know, reforming the system to make it more amenable to a third party. I'm not even quite clear under the structure that we have what we anticipate is going to happen with that third party in Congress. But if you were going to do that, that would be the way to do it. But the problem is, you know, you're never going to get those structural changes without at least some beachhead. And we're at the point where it seems to me that if there was a legitimate attempt, you know, to do this, or there was a legitimate hunger for a third party, that you would see that. Like, you know, in this state, for instance, the Working Families Party is a fusion party, and you can vote on the Working Families Party, and it's basically just it's not really a party in the sense that it really is just sort of more of like an advocacy group that has leveraged being on the ballot and using that to get strength with other parties. But there are some states where the Working Family Parties is its distinct party, and they're you know, starting to get some traction. And there's occasions where they do it in New York City too, and maybe in various places in New York. So I mean, there are models out there for it. I'm not sure that, particularly in the context of local elections, that really we have like these major structural problems as much as we have like a failure of an appetite for it.
Well, I'm not sure that that's true. I mean, if you took a poll of Americans at large and assessed their satisfaction with the two major parties, I think you'd find that the vast majority of people hate both parties.
But yeah, I know. But if you also took a poll saying, would you prefer the parties to compromise and get along, or to you know, to be rancorous, you'd probably get compromise and get along. And the fact of the matter is,
I mean, fair enough.
I mean, you know, do you prefer negative campaigning or positive campaigning? Oh, positive campaigning. Except for when it comes time to vote, I want to vote for the person who's got less garbage on them. I mean, you know, like I just don't think those. I don't find that poll. You know, I'm dissatisfied with them too. But I mean, if you want to spend 5 or 10 minutes, explain to me, like, do you want, you know, but even if people want that, if that's not their number one issue that they're voting on, it's just not going to happen. So it really becomes a question of like, where are you going to deploy your resources in terms, for me, where are you going to deploy your resources for the most likelihood of material benefit for as many people as possible?
Yeah, and I get that. And I feel like that's a common way to think about it. I guess my point is just that the two-party system is inherently flawed because it promotes that negative partisanship that you're talking about.
Totally agree. But you know what else I'll tell you is inherently flawed? Our Constitution. Our system of government, I think, is also inherently flawed. And
right, but even within the confines of the Constitution, you can make a lot of really substantive changes that would allow for viable third and fourth and fifth parties without having to meet that bar of a constitutional amendment.
I mean, I agree. I agree. But I mean, I'm not convinced that it's really a constitutional bar that is inhibiting that. The fact is that people who aspire to power go after that power. And unless a third party can, without a structural change that is incumbent upon people who are already holding power, relinquishing that power, unless they can figure out a way of getting some traction, which they have been unable to do in my lifetime. And this is somebody, you know, I'm somebody who voted for Ralph Nader specifically to build the power of the Greens in 2000. And I just watched this dude walk away. And so, like, you know, I'm skeptical that is where I should be deploying my resources.
Okay, and that's a totally reasonable point. I'm not going to be the one to make the best argument for this, but again, just a guest suggestion for the future. Lee Drutman at New America, he's fantastic on this.
Okay. I think I've read some.
I really love the show. Appreciate you taking my call.
All right, thanks.
Yep. Have a good one.
All right, thanks.
I mean, I'm certainly sympathetic to the argument. There's no doubt about it.
Although I think, well, I don't know. I think like ranked choice voting, for instance, I've seen that work. Like that's been implemented in a few places. And
it can also go sideways.
Yeah, it might help the people we don't want it to help. I think maybe like the two-party system, if you can actually like get on that ballot and take that position, might be a better way to get some actual leftists in power. So I think like if we had a grassroots movement that could force these sorts of changes, like maybe you force decommodification of healthcare and stuff like that first.
I mean, that's the question. Is like, you know, like I'm not even convinced. Like, okay, let's say we had a vibrant third party that came from the left, and so we had 1/3 Republicans, 1/3 Democrats, 1/3, you know, leftist party. Why do we assume that we're going to get a better outcome? It's going to be, you're going to have 1/3 of the power. Assuming all of your politicians that you've been able to elect on this project are great. Why do you think that you're going to be able to sort of like defeat the centrist party, let's say, and the far right party, who certainly, unshackled from any even pretense of having to serve the left, are going to find a lot of common ground? I mean, you know, so I mean, there's no doubt about that it's rigged, but yeah, politicians are going to protect their own power. That's like the first thing they're going to do. All right, let's do some IMs. And it's just, you know, I'm not against them. If people, you know, again, let 1,000 flowers bloom. But if you're asking me why I don't dedicate my resource towards that, that's my answer. And here's the other reason. CIA handler.
Obviously.
On the IM. Hey, Sammy, I just thought I could recommend watching a new video by YouTuber, video essayist, and fellow CIA asset, Jose. Goes into how Jimmy Dore is acting as a tool for far-right conspiracy theories pushed by fascist enablers like Tucker Carlson, and a tool for opportunists in the Republican Party by validating their dog and pony show and acting as if it's a crusade for truth.
Jose does great videos, and I saw that before we went live today, and I'm looking forward to watching it this evening. Because, yeah, why would the guy who
after you watched me on Doomed?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I will watch that, but I'm excited about the Jose thing. I will watch you on VOD. But the Jose thing, Jimmy Dore, the guy.
The channel's just called Jose.
Yeah, at Jose, and yeah, like the Jimmy Dore, that I Want a Lava Jato T-shirt guy that calls everybody else CIA plants. So.
Yes, love this.
It's Blue Jay is the logo.
Okay, I see it now. Thanks.
Oh, all right.
I know that wasn't just for my.
I had more time, too much time to read the next paragraph. Requesting Professor Wendy Snuts on. And then just like, let in. That's pretty well done. But yeah. I saw it. Sorry. Prairie Fire Kowalski. Hey, guys. Speaking of surgery, Sam, I got my left thumb caught in a chain and sprocket on a gas-powered wire winder 3 years ago. It cut 2/3 to the... Okay.
All right.
I bring this up for two reasons. A, to make you squeamish. Okay, don't want to see that. B, to point out the failure of U.S. healthcare system to address what in Europe should have been a basic surgery that no one have to decide to spend 20 grand out of pocket to be fully healed, or just 5,000 to be able to keep the thumb. Medicare for all would be nice indeed. Horrible. Man shovel. New fun half slaps hard. Martin Landau. How come I checked the voting record of my congressman for transparency? It's New Jersey Representative Andy Kim. He went viral for cleaning up the Capitol after January 6th. Not sure if he's a progressive or more center left. I'm not sure that, I don't know how long he's been in there. Voting record would be in there, but see what organizations support him. But check the voting record. You can just go and Google Andy Kim's voting record. Left-handed stranger. Question about inflation, piggybacking on the British guy's call 979. Sorry, I tweeted Emma a video about Strodes. Colorado baby boomer correction, Sam. 2 senators did not block the extension of the child tax credit. 52 did. Quit letting the Republicans off as they have no responsibility. Agreed. I understand. Yes, agreed. My expectations of the Republican Party are much more limited. Train boy, cars suck, just take a train. And the final IM of the day. Comes from Joe Biven. Do you think the trade-off of not antagonizing Manchin so he didn't switch parties and D-Senate can confirm judges was worth it, assuming we accept the premise that this was a real calculation that was made? My centrist friends argue this, and I don't buy it. I also don't really know if the judiciary is a lost cause at this point. If it was the case, if I am to accept the assumption that he would have jumped parties if it was antagonized, I think that there is a good argument to keep him to get judges in, because if he's not going to vote for it, he's not going to vote for it. I'm not convinced he would have switched parties. Matt, Bradley, Emma, great job today. See you folks tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth